Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Vision Harry, presenting to you today. Remus Lupin ran a Marauder Diagnostic on Harry, and delivered the 29 binding report to Amelia Bones. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Reckoning. The summer had settled over Privet Drive like a held breath. It was the kind of neighborhood that prided itself on sameness: identical lawns, identical hedges, identical net curtains twitching at identical windows. Number 4 sat in the middle of it all like a small beige fortress, and inside that fortress, Harry Potter had spent the better part of 6 weeks doing almost nothing at all. That wasn't entirely accurate. He did things. He ate, when the Dursleys left food accessible. He slept, though sleep had become a complicated and unreliable business since the graveyard. He watched the ceiling of his bedroom for long stretches of time, following the same hairline crack from the corner near the wardrobe to the spot above his pillow, thinking about Cedric Diggory's face, then forcing himself to stop thinking about it, then thinking about it again. He wrote letters that he never sent. He received letters that said nothing useful. The order, and he knew now that there was an order, because Fred and George Weasley had the emotional subtlety of bulldozers and had let it slip in their last letter before catching themselves, apparently had a policy of keeping Harry informed of precisely nothing, which he was starting to find less protective and more insulting by the day. He was 15 years old. Voldemort had come back in front of his eyes. He had watched a boy die and dragged his body home and been told, essentially, to sit in his room and wait. So he waited. He got very good at it. He got very good at the particular kind of stillness that looks like patience from the outside but is something else entirely on the inside, a compression, a coiling. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just knew that the waiting couldn't go on forever. It was a Tuesday when Remus Lupin knocked on the front door of number 4 Privet Drive, and the entire trajectory of Harry's summer, and a great deal more besides, changed irrevocably. Harry heard the knock from upstairs. He heard Uncle Vernon's heavy footsteps crossing the hall, heard the door open, and then heard a silence that was distinctly different from the normal silences Vernon Dursley produced. Vernon was a man of loud silences, silences filled with pointed throat clearing and the conspicuous rustling of newspapers. This one was flat and stunned. "I'm here to see Harry," Remus said pleasantly. "I'm an old friend of his father's." "He's not, we don't," Vernon started, and Harry was already off his bed and moving. He hit the top of the stairs just as Remus looked up, and something about the expression on Remus's face made Harry's stomach tighten. Not the pleasantness he'd used on Vernon, that was already gone, replaced with something quieter and more careful. The expression of someone who had decided to do a hard thing and was going to see it through. "Harry," Remus said, and his voice was warm enough. "You look well." Harry was very aware of how he looked. He'd caught his reflection this morning, the shadows under his eyes, the way his school robes from last year were loose across his shoulders in a way they hadn't been in September. "You're a terrible liar," he said, and came down the stairs. Vernon made a sound like a boiling kettle and Remus looked at him with a kind of pleasant, immovable attention that was somehow more disconcerting than a direct threat. "You have such a lovely home," Remus said, completely sincerely, in the way that made it absolutely clear he didn't mean it at all. "I'll have Harry back before dinner. We have some academic matters to discuss." Vernon did not want Remus Lupin inside his house. This was evident from the set of his jowls and the color moving up from his collar. But there was something about Remus, some quality of stillness, of a man who had survived worse things than an irate homeowner, that apparently convinced Vernon that argument was not the path of least resistance. He stepped back. They went outside. The day was warm and flat, the kind of summer afternoon that lies heavy on everything. They walked to the end of the close and around the corner to a small park that was mostly empty, 2 children on the swings at the far end, a mother reading on a bench. Remus steered them to the most distant bench, the one behind the oak tree, and sat down with the deliberate movements of a man whose joints troubled him more than he usually let on. Harry sat beside him and waited. "How are you sleeping?" Remus asked. "I'm not, particularly." "Nightmares?" Sometimes. Harry looked at the swings. The children had left. You didn't come to ask about my sleep. No. Remus was quiet for a moment. He had his hands loosely clasped between his knees, and he was looking at the middle distance in the way he sometimes had in third year, when he was thinking something through that he didn't quite want to share yet. I've been doing a great deal of thinking, these past weeks. About your father. About things I should have paid more attention to. Like what? Remus turned to look at him. Up close, in the daylight, he looked older than Harry remembered, the grey at his temples more pronounced, the lines around his mouth deeper. But his eyes were the same. They were always the same, amber and sharp and seeing more than most people wanted to be seen. I want to run a diagnostic on you, Remus said. A magical one. Thorough. Not the basic kind, not what Madame Pomfrey does at school. Something much more detailed. Harry stared at him. Why? Because something has been bothering me for 3 years and I want to know if I'm right or wrong. What's been bothering you? Remus hesitated, and it was not the hesitation of a man who didn't know what to say. It was the hesitation of a man choosing how much of the truth to put down in front of someone. Harry had gotten quite good at recognizing the difference. Your magic, Remus said finally. The texture of it. The way it behaves. There are things about it that don't add up, Harry. Your father was one of the most naturally gifted wizards of his generation. Not just in terms of power, but in terms of range. He was an animagus at 15. He had an instinct for ancient and complex magic that Flitwick used to say was almost ancestral. Your mother, he stopped. Started again. Your mother was something else entirely. And you fight Voldemort at 11 years old on raw instinct and survive. You produce a corporeal Patronus at 13. You survive the Triwizard Tournament against all conceivable odds. And yet in ordinary classroom magic, you're good but not, he made a small, careful gesture. Not that. Harry was very still. I want to know, Remus said quietly, if someone has interfered with your magic. The words hit the way quiet words sometimes do, not like a blow but like a key in a lock, turning something open that Harry hadn't even known was closed. Can you do that? Harry asked. The diagnostic. Yes. It's called the Marauder's Reckoning, which is a terrible name, and your father named it, which tells you everything. It was something the 4 of us developed together in our 7th year for entirely disreputable reasons. We were trying to figure out whether Sirius had accidentally bound himself to a prank contract with a 4th year. He had, as it turned out. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But the diagnostic itself was genuinely rigorous. It reads magical layering, every spell, every binding, every ward that has been applied to a magical person over their lifetime, going right back to infancy. It maps them. And you think there might be bindings on me? I think there might be bindings on you, Remus confirmed. Harry thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Do it. They went back to the house and Remus, with a politeness that brooked no argument, informed Vernon that Harry would be using his bedroom for a private academic assessment that would take approximately 1 hour and that he was not to be disturbed. Vernon managed to produce 3 different expressions simultaneously, outrage, suspicion, and a kind of baffled resignation, and then retreated to the living room. Harry's bedroom was as it always was, small and slightly airless, the Hedwigless owl cage in the corner, a stack of Hermione's care packages stacked by the wardrobe. Remus stood in the middle of it for a moment, and something moved across his face when he looked at the single bed and the broken desk and the lock on the outside of the door, an old lock, fitted when Harry was small, and though it was no longer used, it was still there. He looked at it for a moment and his jaw set, very slightly, before he smoothed the expression away. Sit on the floor, Remus said. Cross-legged is fine. Wand out. Harry sat. Remus drew his own wand, long, slightly battered, willow and unicorn hair, and began. The Marauder's Reckoning, as a piece of spell work, was not visually dramatic. It didn't produce explosions or columns of light. What it produced was something more like breath fogging on a cold morning, a slow, spreading luminescence that moved outward from Remus's wand tip and settled around Harry like a second skin, following the exact contours of his body without quite touching it. Harry felt it, though. That was the thing. He felt it the way you feel the edge of a sleeping limb waking up, a sensation that was not quite pain but was not comfortable, a deep register buzzing that started somewhere in the middle of his chest and moved outward through his arms and into his hands. His fingers tingled. His vision sharpened briefly, then blurred, then sharpened again. Remus stood very still, his wand tracing slow, methodical patterns, his eyes moving over Harry with an attention so complete and focused that Harry found he couldn't look away. He watched Remus's face the way you watch someone reading a letter, waiting for the change of expression that tells you what the news is. It came 3 minutes in. It was subtle. A slight constriction around the eyes. A small intake of breath. Remus kept his wand moving, kept his face professionally neutral, but his free hand, resting at his side, folded slowly into a fist. 5 minutes. The light around Harry deepened from pale gold to something almost amber, and within it, Harry began to see, or feel, it was difficult to distinguish, shapes. Not shapes exactly. More like pressure points. Places in the ambient glow where the light thickened, became dense, like knots in wood. He counted them without meaning to, the way you count things when you're nervous and need something to do with your mind. 1. 3. 7. 14. He stopped at 22 because Remus said, very quietly, "Harry, I need you to stay still." "I'm still. I know. I'm talking to myself." Remus's voice was steady but there was something underneath it, a restraint that cost him something. He kept going. 26. 28. 29. The light faded. Remus lowered his wand. He stood in the middle of the room, looking at the space Harry occupied, and he was very quiet for what felt like a long time. Harry waited. "Tell me," Harry said. Remus looked at him. 29 bindings. The word sat in the small room like something physical. 29, Harry repeated. "Yes. What kind of bindings?" Remus walked to the bed and sat down on the edge of it. He was moving like a man who had just absorbed a physical shock, careful, deliberate, making sure his legs were working properly. He leaned his elbows on his knees and pressed his knuckles against his mouth for a moment. "Various kinds," he said. "Magical output suppressors. Those limit how much raw power you can channel at any given time, they create an artificial ceiling. There are 4 of those, layered on top of each other. Range limiters, those affect the breadth of magic you can access, like having a library and only being allowed into certain rooms. 6 of those." He paused. Talent-specific bindings. Those are more precise, they target individual innate abilities and suppress them selectively. Parseltongue is bound. Your natural legilimency is bound, I'm a natural legilimens. An untrained one, but yes. Quite strongly, apparently. Remus looked up. There's an animagus potential that's been suppressed since you were approximately 18 months old. An affinity for ancient magic. Several others. Harry was quiet. He was doing the thing he did, taking in information and holding it very flat and still inside himself, not reacting to it yet. Later he would react to it. Right now he needed more of it. "Who put them there?" he said. Remus was quiet. "Remus." Harry's voice was level, and Remus looked at him with something that might have been surprise at the levelness of it. "Who put them there?" "Some of them, a handful, the earliest ones, bear a signature I don't recognize yet. Ancient. Pre-existing. Possibly hereditary suppressors put in place by someone in your family line, which happens sometimes with very powerful bloodlines, to prevent accidental catastrophic magic in infancy." He held Harry's gaze. "Some of them bear Petunia's signature." Or rather, not Petunia's magic, because Petunia is a squib. But she was on the Hogwarts registry, briefly, before she was formally declassified. She had a residual magical trace. Someone used that trace as an anchor to bind you through the blood wards. Someone, Harry said. Yes. Someone with a very specific knowledge of blood magic and squib registry traces. Remus said nothing. Someone like Dumbledore, Harry said. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds. 7 of the bindings bear his signature, Remus said. Yes. Harry nodded. The nod was very small and very controlled, and it said more about what was happening inside him than any raised voice would have. The others? 3 I haven't identified yet. 2 bear signatures from Hogwarts Castle wards, passive suppressors, applied automatically to any student whose magical output exceeds certain thresholds. That's actually somewhat standard, though the threshold they were set to for you was, Remus stopped. Started again. Much lower than standard. Someone adjusted them. Right. Harry looked at his hands. His hands looked the same as they always did. He turned them over once, slowly. What do they feel like? When they come off, I mean. I don't know, Remus said honestly. I've never removed 29. Some of them are old and deep. Removing them too quickly would be destabilizing. We need to do this carefully, over time, in the right environment. But they can come off. Yes. All of them. Remus's voice was very firm on this point. All of them, Harry. Harry looked up at him. Remus was watching him with an expression that was a complicated mixture of guilt and grief and something harder than either, a kind of fierce, protective anger that he was very clearly reining in on Harry's behalf. Harry recognized it. It was the same expression Remus had worn in the Shrieking Shack, explaining about Peter Pettigrew. The expression of a man who had been slow to act and was now making up for it with everything he had. I should have done this 3 years ago, Remus said quietly. When I first started teaching you. I noticed things, discrepancies, and I told myself I was overthinking it. That you were young, still developing. I told myself, he stopped. I told myself a great many things that I believed because believing them was easier than not believing them. You're doing it now, Harry said. Yes. Remus met his eyes. I'm doing it now. Harry unfolded from the floor and stood. He was slightly shorter than Remus sitting down, and taller than Remus would be once he stood, and for a moment they just looked at each other, and there was nothing of teacher and student in it, nothing of protector and protected. It was something simpler than that. What about the report? Harry said. You said a diagnostic like this produces a report. A comprehensive one, yes. Remus reached into his coat. He was wearing a coat despite the heat, because Remus Lupin dressed for climate with the same optimism he applied to most things, and produced a folded scroll. He handed it to Harry. Harry unrolled it. It was dense and technical and written in a script that shifted and changed as the magic in it continued cataloging, but even without a full understanding of the terminology, the shape of it was clear. 29 separate entries. Each one annotated with placement date, magical signature, nature of suppression, estimated impact on natural ability. There was a column at the far right that bore a heading, Comparative Baseline, Unbound. Harry read down it. He read it twice. He rolled it back up and held it in his hand. We need to report this, Harry said. Not a question. Yes. And I have a thought about who we report it to. Remus stood, and he was taller now, standing, with a kind of straightness about him that hadn't been there before. Not Dumbledore. Not the Order. Someone with actual legal authority and the spine to use it. Amelia Bones. Remus blinked, very slightly. Hermione talks about her, Harry said. Says she's the most competent person in the ministry. She is, by some margin. Remus looked at him with something close to approval. Yes. Amelia Bones. Head of the DMLE. She'll want a full formal report, everything documented, authenticated, signed. If I present it properly, she's legally obligated to investigate. And legally obligated means she can't bury it. She wouldn't bury it regardless, Remus said. But yes. The moment I file that report, it becomes part of official ministry record. It can't disappear. Harry looked at the scroll in his hand. How long to write the full report? A day. 2, at most. Then we need a place to work that isn't here. Harry looked around the small bedroom with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. I wasn't planning on spending the rest of the summer at Privet Drive anyway. Remus sent a Patronus to Sirius while Harry packed. The Patronus was a wolf, which Harry had always found appropriate, and it went silvery bright through the bedroom wall and disappeared, carrying its message. Sirius's reply came 7 minutes later in the form of a large silver dog that padded through the window frame and sat on Harry's bed and opened its mouth and said, in Sirius's voice, "Tell me everything. I'll have the safe house ready by the time you arrive. Also, I just made soup, so there had better be a reason for you to get here before I finish it." Harry looked at it for a moment. "Your friends are strange," he told Remus. "Deeply," Remus agreed. "That's generally how friendships work." Harry packed with the efficiency of someone who had never had very much. Most of it fit in his school trunk. He added Hedwig's empty cage, his broom, the photo album Hagrid had given him in first year, and the worn copy of Advanced Transfiguration Theory that he'd been reading and rereading all summer without quite knowing why. He added his wand to his pocket, where it lived, always, because the only time Harry Potter was without his wand he was miserable about it. Uncle Vernon was in the kitchen when they came down the stairs with the trunk. He was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, and the look he gave the trunk was the look of a man fighting between relief and the need to appear to be the one who had decided something. "Taking your things, are you?" Vernon said. "Looks like," Harry said. "And you'll be staying wherever you're going." "That's the plan." Vernon's mouth worked for a moment. He was a man of very fixed ideas about how things were supposed to go, and none of those ideas had ever included the possibility that Harry might simply leave under his own authority, with a friend, without anyone's permission. He had always required the application of external force. Dumbledore arriving in person, or the Weasleys in a flying car. He had never considered that Harry might simply walk out. Harry was finding, today of all days, that he had very little patience left for considering other people's fixed ideas about him. "The wards," Vernon said suddenly, switching tactics. That Dumbledore said. "Dumbledore says a lot of things," Harry said. "Have a good summer." He walked out. The safe house was in Wales, which Harry had not previously visited, and it was accessed through a port key that Remus produced from his coat pocket in the form of a slightly tarnished bottle cap. It deposited them in a small, low-ceilinged stone cottage on the side of a hill, surrounded by heather and the kind of overcast sky that felt like weather making up its mind. Sirius was already there. He looked better than he had at the end of third year, not well, but better. Still too thin, still with the quality of a man reclaiming himself from something, but his eyes were alert and his movements were quick, and he had, apparently, actually been making soup, because the smell of it filled the cottage and it was, against all odds, good. He took one look at Harry and then looked at Remus. "How bad?" Sirius said. Remus held up the scroll, and something about the way he held it, the control in his hands, told Sirius everything before he even unrolled it. Sirius read it standing up. He read it the way Sirius read most things that mattered, fast, intensely, his jaw getting progressively tighter as he moved down the page. When he reached the section with Dumbledore's signature annotated 7 times, he stopped and set the scroll down on the kitchen table with a very deliberate care, which was worse than if he'd thrown it, because Sirius Black was not a careful man and the care he put into setting that scroll down was the kind that holds something violent still inside itself. 7, Sirius said. His voice was controlled and very quiet. 7, Remus confirmed. Sirius looked at Harry. Are you all right? I'm fine, Harry said, and meant it in the particular way he always meant it, which was less I'm fine and more I'm upright and functional and angry, and that will do. You're not fine, Sirius said. But that's valid. That's a reasonable response. He looked at Remus again. You're going to remove them? Carefully. Systematically. Starting with the least complex and working inward. And then we're going to Bones. Yes. Sirius picked the scroll back up, looked at it once more, and set it face down on the table. Right, he said. He went back to the stove and stirred the soup with a thoroughness that suggested he needed something to do with his hands. Sit down, Harry. Eat something. Remus is going to need to draft the full report, and I'm going to need to not. He stopped. Just sit down. Harry sat down. The kitchen was warm from the stove. Outside, through the small window over the sink, the Welsh hillside was grey-green and enormous, and the sky was doing something complicated with light. Harry put both hands flat on the kitchen table, the old wood, warm and slightly uneven, and looked at his hands and thought about 29, and what 29 meant, and what it meant that the number was 29 and not 0. Sirius put a bowl of soup in front of him. Chicken, with a lot of pepper in it, and thick bread on the side. Harry looked at it and then looked up at Sirius, who was watching him with an expression he was trying to make casual and not quite managing. It's really good soup, Harry said. Something in Sirius's face broke open for just a second, and then he laughed, a short, real laugh, and dragged a chair out and sat across from Harry. Don't sound so surprised. I had to develop skills in Azkaban. Mental projection of food is one of them. You projected chicken soup. I projected all sorts of things. He picked up a spoon and pointed it at Harry. The point is, you're going to eat that, and then Remus is going to start on the bindings, and tomorrow we're going to make Amelia Bones's Tuesday significantly more interesting. It's not Tuesday, Remus said from the corner of the room, where he'd already spread the diagnostic scroll across a narrow writing desk and was uncapping ink. It'll feel like a Tuesday, Sirius said. For fudge. Tuesday is a middle of the week, nothing should go wrong kind of day, and it's about to go extremely wrong. Harry ate his soup. It was, genuinely, very good. The first binding came off at 9 o'clock that night. Remus had been working through the report all afternoon and into the evening, compiling the formal version, the kind of language that ministry documentation required, cross-referencing each binding with magical law, annotating the relevant statutes, making it airtight. He worked with the focused precision of a former teacher and former soldier, which was essentially what he was. At 9, he set the report aside and pulled his chair to face Harry, who was sitting by the window in the last of the grey light, and he said, the first one is the smallest. Placed when you were approximately 14 months old. It looks hereditary, not malicious, probably precautionary. A simple output limiter. The kind sometimes placed on children showing very early signs of uncontrolled powerful magic. My parents put it on? Harry asked. Possibly. Or a healer acting on their behalf. Remus held his wand very steady. You may feel something when it comes off. I want you to tell me what you feel. Okay. The spell Remus used was quiet and precise, a long low murmur in Latin that Harry didn't entirely follow, and when it landed on him it felt like the pressure in your ears equalizing. Like the moment on a plane when the altitude drops and the blocked-up sound of the world suddenly comes back. It was so small it was almost nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Harry's hands, flat on his thighs, went very still. He breathed in. His lungs felt, he couldn't explain it exactly. Slightly larger. As though he'd been breathing at 80% for so long that 80% had become his baseline, and now he'd just been handed that last 20 and didn't quite know what to do with it yet. I feel it, he said. Good. Remus looked at his face carefully, reading it like a text he was trying to authenticate. Any pain? No. Harry flexed his fingers. It's like taking off something I didn't know I was wearing. Sirius, from the other side of the room where he'd been pretending to read a Quidditch magazine for the past hour, looked up. How many more can you do tonight? 2, Remus said. Maybe 3. The first few are the smallest. The deep ones, the power suppressors, the talent-specific ones, those are going to take time. Days. Then do 3, Harry said. Harry, Remus. Harry looked at him steadily. I've been wearing 29 of these my entire life. Take 3 off tonight. Remus looked at him for a long moment, at the set of his jaw and the quiet certainty in his eyes, and then he nodded once. 3 tonight, he said. He uncapped his wand again, and outside the Welsh hillside was dark, and inside the cottage was warm, and Harry Potter sat in a chair in the lamplight and let Remus Lupin begin the long, careful work of returning to him what had always been his. By midnight, 3 bindings were gone. Harry lay in the cottage's narrow spare bedroom and stared at the ceiling, a different ceiling, lower and stone and not cracked, and thought about what Remus had told him, and what the scroll had shown him, and what it meant that 29 separate acts of interference had been performed on him without his knowledge, without his consent, by people who had decided that his power was theirs to manage. He didn't feel rage about it. He thought he should, and perhaps later he would. What he felt was something harder and quieter than rage. Something that felt, surprisingly, a lot like relief. He had always known, underneath the confusion, underneath the years of being told he was odd and overwhelming and too much, that something didn't fit right. That there was a gap between what he was and what he was being allowed to be. He had never had a name for it. He had never had a number. 29, it turned out, was the number. He closed his eyes. He thought about Amelia Bones, who Hermione had described as the most competent person in the ministry, and wondered what her face would look like when she read the report. He thought it would be interesting to find out. He slept well, for the first time in 6 weeks, and did not dream about the graveyard. Chapter 2, The Unbinding. Harry woke before dawn. Not from a nightmare, which was new, and worth noting, but from something else entirely. A restlessness that felt almost physical, like the buzzing before a thunderstorm. He lay still for a moment, cataloging it, and gradually understood that the sensation was internal rather than atmospheric. It was coming from him. Or rather, from the places inside him where Remus had removed the bindings last night, 3 small voids where something constrictive had been, now open and slightly raw, like new skin under a lifted bandage. He got up, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and padded barefoot into the cottage kitchen. Sirius was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with a cup of tea and the diagnostic scroll open in front of him, and he looked up when Harry came in with the expression of a man who had also not been sleeping particularly well, for entirely different reasons. Couldn't sleep? Harry said. Slept fine, Sirius said, which was clearly a lie but delivered with enough conviction that Harry let it go. He nodded at the kettle. Still hot. Harry poured himself tea and sat across from Sirius. The scroll was face up between them, and in the pre-dawn dimness the magical notation on it had a faint luminescence of its own, the binding signatures glowing softly like embers. Harry looked at it without touching it. Which ones are his? Harry asked. Sirius didn't pretend not to know what he meant. He pointed to 7 entries, spread through the middle of the document, not the earliest bindings, not the most ancient. The deliberate ones, placed with precision by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Some were dated to before Hogwarts. Harry was 4 in one annotation, 6 in another. The most recent was dated 3 years ago. Harry's second year. Second year. When the Chamber of Secrets was open and a basilisk was moving through the walls and Dumbledore had been removed from the school and Harry had been 14 years old and terrified. And someone had placed a binding on him during that year. He came back to school after being suspended, Harry said, tracing the date with one finger without touching the scroll itself. He was back for the end of term. He could have done it then. He could have, Sirius said, very carefully. I'm not going to pretend it might be someone else. I know. Sirius wrapped both hands around his mug. I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to find a version of this that makes sense. That has a reasonable explanation. A good reason. He was quiet for a moment. I can't find one. I keep trying and I keep ending up back at the same place. Which is? Sirius looked up. In the low light his face was all angles and old shadows, and he looked, briefly, like the man in the Azkaban photographs, the hollowness of someone who has survived something that took a piece of them on the way out. But his eyes were clear. He made a decision, Sirius said. About your life. About who you were allowed to be. And he made it without asking you, without telling James, without telling anyone, and he did it because he decided that his assessment of what was necessary was more important than your right to your own magic. A pause. That's not, I can't find the reading where that's all right, Harry. I've tried. Harry nodded. Neither can I. They sat with that for a moment, the two of them, in the grey cottage kitchen with the pre-dawn pressing against the windows, and it was almost companionable, the quietness of two people who have arrived at the same conclusion by different paths and found each other waiting there. Then Remus appeared in the kitchen doorway in a terrible dressing gown and blinked at both of them. It's 4 a.m, he said. We know, Harry and Sirius said, in unison, and Remus made the face of a man whose patience is a professional skill rather than a natural gift and went to put the kettle on again. He started on the 4th binding after breakfast. The morning had come in grey and blustery, the kind of Welsh weather that couldn't decide between drizzle and determination, and Harry sat in the armchair near the window while Remus stood before him with his wand and the expression of a man performing surgery who happens to also feel personally responsible for the patient requiring it. The 4th binding was larger than the previous 3. Harry felt that immediately, not from pain, but from the difference in resistance. The first 3 had released like held breath. This one was more like a rusted door. Remus worked at it for nearly 20 minutes, his wand moving in the small, precise patterns of complex diagnostic magic, his breathing controlled and professional, and Harry sat as still as he could and tried to help by not thinking about anything useful. Talk to me, Remus said without looking up from his work. About anything. It helps to keep you present. What do you want to hear? Whatever's in your head. Harry thought about it. I've been reading Advanced Transfiguration Theory all summer. The copy from the library. I kept, there was a chapter on material recursion that I didn't understand the first time but I kept going back to it. I think I was responding to something in it that I couldn't access yet. Remus's wand paused for just a fraction of a second. Material recursion. That's 6th year content. I know. I've read the 6th year Transfiguration Theory twice. I couldn't do most of it practically, there was always this, Harry searched for the right word. This wall. Like I could see what I was supposed to be doing and I just couldn't get there. Like reaching for something just past your fingertips. Those would be the output suppressors, Remus said. The ceiling they imposed on your raw power. Theory and understanding were never bound, just implementation. He resumed his work. Your mind has been running well ahead of your body for years. That's a polite way to put it. I'm a very polite person. You once told Snape that his understanding of wolfsbane was charming in its limitations. Remus smiled without looking up. That was extremely polite, given the context. The door clicked. Remus had set the 4th binding loose, and Harry felt it come free in a way that was impossible to describe accurately but that he would later attempt to describe to Ron as the difference between swimming in your clothes and swimming without them, everything suddenly offering less resistance, the ambient feel of the world slightly sharpened. He sat with it for a moment. That one was bigger. Significantly. How do you feel? Harry flexed his right hand, reached for his wand from the side table, and without really thinking about it cast a quiet lumos. The light came from his wand tip and hit the far wall, and Sirius, who was reading in the corner, looked up, because the light was not the pale comfortable glow of a standard lumos. It was brilliant and clear and it lit the whole room. The three of them looked at the light for a moment. "Oh," Sirius said. "That," Remus said carefully, "is the fourth binding coming off." He looked at Harry's face. "We haven't even started on the major ones yet." Harry cancelled the spell. The room was dimmer for it. "Then let's not waste time," he said. By midday they had removed 7. It was not comfortable work, for either of them. The bindings grew increasingly resistant as Remus worked inward through the layers, some of them requiring 20 minutes of sustained, precise spell work, one stubborn cluster of 3 that had been placed simultaneously and had fused partially over the years, requiring Remus to treat them as a single unit and then separate them one at a time, like untangling a knot without pulling the wrong thread. Harry's magic, with each removal, felt less like a tightly managed stream and more like what it actually was. He didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. He had always thought of his magic as something he wielded, like a tool. This felt more like something he was. It was disorienting and clarifying at the same time, a particular combination that made him want to both sit very still and do something very large. He settled for asking Remus questions. "The animagus potential," Harry said, during one of the breaks where Remus was replenishing his energy with tea and the expression of a man who had been thinking very hard for several hours. "How would I know what form it would be?" "You wouldn't, until you began the training. It reveals itself gradually." "What were my father's? I mean, what were the signs?" "That he'd be a stag." Remus considered this. He had a particular affinity for large spaces. He was always uncomfortable in small rooms, not claustrophobic exactly, but restless. And he was fast. Unnaturally fast, even before he completed the transformation. Some of that is the animagus nature leaking through before you know what it is. He looked at Harry over his teacup. "You're fast. I'm a seeker." "You were a seeker before you'd had a single lesson on a broom." Sprout told McGonagall that you had the fastest reflexes she'd ever seen in a first year. He paused. "I always wondered. What form do you think I'd be?" "I have my suspicions." But he didn't share them, which was very Remus. He had a professor's instinct for letting people discover things themselves. Harry let it drop. Sirius, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, said, "He'd be a griffin." Both of them looked at him. "I'm serious," Sirius said, which prompted the inevitable, and then he pointed at Harry. "Don't. I mean it about the griffin. Look at him. He's impossible to catch, he's loyal to a fault, he has a genuinely terrible temper when pushed. I don't have a terrible temper. You once hexed Draco Malfoy with a full-body bind in front of a teacher. He deserved it. He absolutely deserved it. That's not the point." Sirius came back into the room properly and dropped into the armchair. "The point is that it takes a great deal to get you there, but once you're there, and you don't back down. That's Griffin behavior. Also," he added, as though this settled the matter, "your father would have found it extremely funny." Harry thought about his father finding it funny. It didn't hurt the way it used to, not a sharp hurt, anyway. More of an old, familiar ache. "Mum," he said. Sirius smiled. "Phoenix. Without a doubt. Lily was, she had this quality of," he searched for it. "When she was angry about something important, something actually worth being angry about, she was completely incandescent. But also absolutely precise. Not burning randomly. Burning specifically. Very Phoenix." He looked at Harry. "You have bits of both." They sat with that for a moment, the three of them, in the cottage that smelled of tea and old wood and rain coming through the window frame. The afternoon brought the hard ones. The first of Dumbledore's bindings, the oldest, placed when Harry was 4, was wound so deep and so tightly around the core of Harry's magical ability that Remus spent 45 minutes just mapping its exact structure before he was willing to touch it. "It's sophisticated," Remus said, and his voice was professionally neutral, but his jaw was doing the thing again. The construction it's beautiful, technically. As a piece of magic. It's layered over the natural magical development points, anchored to 3 different, he stopped. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every placement is precisely calibrated. Which means it wasn't careless, Harry said. No. It wasn't. Remus looked at him. Are you ready for this one? It may be more significant than the previous ones. Do it. Remus did it. This one took an hour. Harry sat through the whole thing because there was nothing else to do, and because sitting through difficult things was something he was constitutionally good at, but this one was different from the others in a way that was harder to bear. Not painful, it wasn't painful, but disorienting in a way that no previous removal had been. It was like trying to recall a word in a language you'd been told you didn't speak. The sense of something returning that had never actually been gone, just locked away, in a room in his own mind with a key that wasn't his. About 20 minutes in, Harry said, Remus. I know. Stay with me. I can feel it. The binding. I can feel what it was doing. Tell me. It was muffling something. Not power exactly. More like depth. Like everything I was doing was coming through 2 layers of cotton wool, and I thought that was just what magic felt like. He paused. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? I can't tell you what it's supposed to feel like for you, Remus said. Everybody's different. But is this what it feels like for you? For other people? A pause. No. What you're describing is significantly more than baseline. He kept his voice measured. Keep still. The hour finished. The binding came loose, not like a lock opening but like a knot untying, gradually, incrementally, and then all at once. Harry sat very still. The world did not look different. The low-ceilinged stone cottage was exactly the same. The grey window, the wooden table, Sirius standing in the doorway with both hands braced on the frame. The same. All of it the same. And yet something had shifted so fundamentally in his perception of himself within it that it might as well have been an entirely different room. He reached for his wand. He thought, very clearly, very simply, about the Patronus charm. Not performed it. Just thought about it. Just held the memory of his parents' voices, not from a dementor, but from his own mind, a conversation with himself about what happiness meant and where he kept it, and let it connect to the charm. A silver shape exploded from his wand without him casting a word. Full corporeal. It hit the far wall of the cottage and turned in the air, and it was not a stag. It was built like one, partly, but it was too large, its wings impossibly bright against the stone walls, and it looked at Harry with eyes that were ancient and specifically familiar in a way that had no logical explanation. It was a griffin. Sirius made a sound. You were right, Harry said. I'm not often right, Sirius said, slightly strangled. This is, Harry, you didn't cast that. I thought it. You thought a corporeal Patronus into existence. Harry looked at it. It stretched one wing, slightly, the way a cat stretches in sunlight. Is that normal? With one binding removed. Remus turned from the wall where he'd been leaning, catching his breath from the hour of concentrated work. He looked at the Patronus. He looked at Harry. His expression was the expression of a man who has run a calculation 3 times and gotten the same extraordinary answer all 3 times and is deciding what to do with the information. No, he said simply. It is not. He pulled out his notebook and wrote something down. Dinner was Sirius cooking again, which turned out to be a transferable skill, shepherd's pie this time, done properly, with rosemary and the kind of aggressive seasoning that suggested Sirius Black cooked the way he did everything, with total commitment and no measuring implements. They ate at the kitchen table. The rain had finally arrived and was serious about it, hammering the cottage roof with the single-minded enthusiasm of Welsh weather fulfilling its destiny. Candles. Warmth. Food. Harry ate 2 full plates without thinking about it, which Sirius tracked with the covert attention of someone pretending not to watch, and then leaned back in his chair and said, "Tell me about the report. What do we actually send to Bones?" Remus pulled the draft from beside his plate. He was the kind of person who kept working documents adjacent to meals, and spread it on the table. "The full diagnostic results. Authenticated with my signature and the Marauder's Reckoning spell seal, which is legally recognized under Magical Assessment Act of 1897. A full annotation of each binding, nature, placement date, signature, estimated magical impact." "And the signatures," Harry said. "Dumbledore's." "The others?" "Yes. Every one that can be identified is identified and attributed in the report." "How does Bones receive it?" Sirius asked. "If we owl it, Dumbledore's people could intercept it. Or the Ministry owls, Fudge's people monitor incoming communications to DMLE. We deliver it in person," Harry said. Both men looked at him. "We walk in and put it on her desk. Can she refuse to receive it?" "If it's formally presented as an official diagnostic under the Magical Assessment Act, she's legally obligated to accept it," Remus said. "Then that's what we do." Harry reached for his water glass. "Tomorrow. We go to the Ministry tomorrow." "Harry," Remus started. "Remus, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say we should wait until more bindings are removed. Until I'm at something closer to full ability." "I was going to say that, yes. And you're not wrong. But here's the thing." Harry set his glass down. "Every day we wait is another day the signatures on those bindings are sitting in Dumbledore's office and Fudge's ministry and wherever else, attached to people who are still making decisions about me. I want it on record. I want it officially on record before anyone figures out that we've been here for 2 days taking apart what they built." Silence at the table, broken only by the rain. "Besides," Harry added, "you said yourself that once it's filed, it can't disappear. So let's file it." Sirius looked at Remus. Remus looked at his shepherd's pie. He appeared to be having a brief internal argument. "We've removed 11 of the 29, Remus said finally. "That's roughly 40%. So I'm running at 40% more than I was on Thursday. Considerably more than 40% more, actually. The ones we've removed include some of the most foundational ones." Remus tapped the table with one finger. "At this point, your magical ceiling is, I don't have a fully accurate measure of it yet. The removed bindings are still settling. But it's high. It's extraordinary, Harry. Even accounting for natural family gift, there's something else at work in your core. Something, the word I keep coming back to is ancestral. There's a depth to it that suggests inheritance from several generations back. Not just your parents. Is that the 3 bindings with the unknown signatures?" "Quite possibly." Remus looked at the scroll. "Those 3 are the deepest of all the remaining ones. Deeper even than Dumbledore's. I won't touch them until everything else is gone. I need to understand what they're containing before I release it." "Which means we have more work to do after the Ministry," Harry said. "Fine. We go tomorrow, we deliver the report, and then we come back and you keep going." Sirius pointed his fork at Harry. "You know he's going to find out. Dumbledore. The moment Bones opens that report and starts pulling threads, he'll know." "I know," Harry said. "And then he's going to come and talk to you." "I know. And he's very good at talking." Sirius said it without particular bitterness. It was a factual observation, from a man who had enormous personal experience of Albus Dumbledore's ability to make reasonable-sounding cases for unreasonable things. "He's been doing it for 60 years and he's very, very good at it." "I'm sure he is," Harry said. "I'm also sure that when he comes, I'll have read the report. I'll have been here when Remus removed every single binding. I'll know exactly what was done, and when, and by whom." He looked up from the table. "Let him talk." Sirius looked at him for a moment, this 15-year-old boy sitting in a cottage in Wales with old magic newly freed and a stillness about him that had never been there before, or had always been there and was only now fully legible, and then he smiled. It was a very particular smile, rare and real, the kind that had nothing to do with performance. Your father, Sirius said quietly, would have had a great deal to say tonight. Good things or bad things? Mostly good. Some overwhelmed. Probably involving the word brilliant said too many times. He stood up and started collecting plates. He was never very original when he was proud of someone. Harry let that sit in him, warmly, and didn't try to do anything with it. After dinner, Remus took off 4 more bindings. By the time they were done it was nearly midnight again, and 15 of 29 were gone, and Harry was sitting in the armchair by the dark window, and something about the quality of his stillness was different from how it had been at Privet Drive. Less compression. Less coiling toward a future point. More simply, present. The Parseltongue, Harry said. It was late enough and warm enough and they'd been working closely enough all day that the thought came out naturally, without preamble. I was thinking about it earlier. The binding on it. The sorting hat said something in first year, it considered Slytherin. I always thought it was just an assessment of my ambition or something. Parseltongue is hereditary in the Slytherin line, Remus said, from the desk where he was updating his notes. But the manner in which you received it, from Voldemort's killing curse, as a Horcrux, that's a different mechanism entirely. The binding on it would have been placed to prevent accidental use in public, probably. By Dumbledore. Yes. Because if I talked to snakes in public, people would ask questions. People would ask questions, Remus confirmed. Harry thought about second year. About the dueling club and Draco's conjured snake and the way the whole room had shifted away from him, the horror on their faces. He had always thought the reaction was about dark magic, about Parseltongue being inherently sinister. He had spent 2 years intermittently ashamed of it. Could I have explained it? Harry said. If I'd known what it was? Yes, Remus said. Easily. It's a hereditary magical language, rare but not unheard of. Several respected historical figures were Parselmouths. The association with dark magic is cultural, not intrinsic. Harry nodded slowly. But if people knew the explanation, Remus said carefully, following the thought Harry was having, they might also ask why a Potter was a Parselmouth. And that conversation leads, eventually, to Horcruxes and Voldemort and things that Dumbledore very much wanted to manage the timing of. So he bound it. Harry paused. How many decisions has he made because the timing wasn't right for him? Neither Remus nor Sirius answered, because there was no answer that was going to improve anything. Remus finished the formal report at 1 in the morning. He'd been at it, off and on, for almost 2 full days, and the result was 11 pages of dense, authenticated, cross-referenced magical documentation with every signature identified, every binding described in technical detail, every relevant statute cited, and an introduction that stated, in the kind of clear, unambiguous prose that legal documents rarely managed, that this was a case of systematic, deliberate, illegal magical interference with a minor, and that the signatories named within the report bore direct responsibility under Sections 4, 7, and 17 of the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1954. He read it aloud to Harry and Sirius. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. That's what we're walking in with tomorrow, Harry said. Yes. And the second Bones files it, the second I hand it to her, officially, it's ministry record. It can be investigated, subpoenaed, read into Wisengamot record. It cannot be erased without evidence of tampering, which would be its own separate crime. Sirius was staring at the middle distance. He had been uncharacteristically quiet for the last 20 minutes, which was never a sign of comfort in Sirius Black. What happens to him, he said. Legally. To Dumbledore. That depends on Bones, Remus said. And on what she decides to prioritize. 7 of the bindings are indisputably his. The statute carries penalties from formal censure up to magical power restriction depending on the severity and intent finding. Magical power restriction, Harry repeated. You mean, binding? Yes. Ironic, but yes. Good, Sirius said, very quietly, and then stood up and went to bed without another word. Remus and Harry sat at the kitchen table. The rain had stopped at some point and through the small window the Welsh hillside was visible under a clouded, moonless sky, all dark mass and outline. Are you worried about tomorrow? Remus asked. No, Harry said, and meant it. Are you? Remus was quiet for a moment. I'm worried about doing it correctly. About making sure every piece of this is legally unassailable, so that nobody can come back and challenge the admissibility of the report or question the diagnostic methodology or, he stopped. I'm a worrier by nature. You're aware. I know. But you've done everything right. I missed it for 3 years. And you found it now. Harry looked at him steadily. That matters, Remus. Remus looked at the report in his hands, 11 pages, 15 bindings removed, 14 still in place, 29 to begin with, one 15-year-old boy who had been carrying all of it without ever knowing the weight had been put there by someone else. He looked at it and then he looked at Harry. Your father would, he started. I know, Harry said. Not dismissively. Warmly. I know he would. Remus nodded. He rolled the report carefully, sealed it with his authenticating charm, and set it in the center of the kitchen table where it would be the first thing they saw in the morning. It sat there in the dark, 11 pages of truth, waiting for Amelia Bones. Harry went to bed. He lay in the narrow room under the low stone ceiling and listened to the hillside settling after the rain, the small sounds of the cottage, the distant understanding that tomorrow would change things in ways that couldn't be taken back. He didn't find that frightening. He found it necessary in the way that breathing is necessary, not a choice so much as a fact of continued existence. He closed his eyes. The 15 freed places in his magic hummed faintly, like strings vibrating after the bow has been lifted, finding their own resonance for the first time. It was not uncomfortable. It was the opposite of uncomfortable. It felt, specifically, like being whole. Not completely, there were still 14. But 15 was an enormous number when you had started at 0, and he could feel the difference between now and Thursday in every part of himself, a new quality of presence in his own skin that he had no previous experience of and no words for yet, but that he was already, quietly, building vocabulary around. Tomorrow, the ministry. Tomorrow, Amelia Bones. Tonight, sleep. He slept. Chapter 3, The Woman with the Monocle. The Ministry of Magic on a Wednesday morning had a specific quality of organized chaos that was entirely its own. The atrium was always busy by 8:30, witches and wizards in robes of every color streaming through the golden fireplaces, shoes clicking on the dark wood floors, the golden fountain splashing cheerfully in the middle of it all, interdepartmental memos wheeling overhead in flocks like brightly colored starlings. It smelled of floor polish and bureaucracy and the particular ozone-adjacent scent of a lot of magic being used in proximity. Harry had been here twice before. Both times had felt like descending into something. Both times he'd been either terrified or furious or both. Today he walked through the flue and stepped out of the fireplace and stood in the atrium and felt entirely calm. Remus was beside him. Sirius was not. They'd had a brief and somewhat heated conversation over breakfast about this, because Sirius had wanted to come and Remus had pointed out, with the gentle inexorability of a man who has made up his mind, that Sirius Black arriving at the Ministry of Magic while still technically a wanted man would convert a straightforward legal filing into a catastrophic incident within approximately 6 minutes. Sirius had argued. Remus had waited him out. Harry had eaten toast and watched them, because the dynamic between the two of them was one of his favorite things, Sirius like a force of nature finding that the immovable object was, in fact, Remus Lupin. Sirius had stayed at the cottage. The report was in Remus's coat. Harry knew this without having to look. Remus's hand went to the left side of his coat every 30 seconds or so, an unconscious check, the way you touch a pocket with something important in it just to make sure the world hasn't rearranged itself and taken it. DMLE is on level 2, Remus said, steering them toward the lifts with the authority of a man who had spent enough years at the edges of official wizarding society to know its geography precisely. I know, Harry said. Remus looked at him sidelong. I paid attention in second year, Harry said. Even when Dad was crashing the car. Arthur, Remus said, with the tone of someone who loved Arthur Weasley dearly and found him an endless source of affectionate despair, is a wonderful man. He is. He's also a terrible driver. They got in the lift. A witch in emerald robes glanced at Harry, did a double take at the scar, and then very deliberately looked at the lift doors for the remainder of the ride. Harry was used to this. It had become so standard a social interaction that he'd stopped registering it the way you stop registering background noise. What he did register, stepping out on level 2, was the difference. Level 2 of the Ministry was not like the atrium. The atrium was designed to impress, all that dark wood and golden light and splashing water. Level 2 was designed to work. The corridor was wide and well lit with a functional, no-nonsense quality, the walls lined with notices and department directives rather than decorative stonework. The doors were heavy and serious. The people moving through it had the brisk, heads-down purposefulness of people who had a great deal to do and were in the process of doing it. A sign on the wall read, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, all visitors must register at the front desk. Unscheduled appointments are subject to availability. They went to the front desk. It was staffed by a young wizard with the slightly harried look of someone 3 weeks into a job that had turned out to be significantly more demanding than the interview suggested. We're here to see Amelia Bones, Remus said pleasantly. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm afraid Director Bones has a full schedule today. We have an official diagnostic report under the Magical Assessment Act of 1897, formally authenticated, requiring legal registration and Director Bones's acknowledgement of receipt. Remus produced the scroll from his coat with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. He placed it on the desk, but kept one hand on it, not relinquishing it, just showing it. The authenticating seal on the end glowed faintly green, the specific color of a properly certified reckoning document. Under Section 12 of that Act, the head of the DMLE is the designated receiving officer for diagnostic reports involving potential criminal violations. She's legally required to see us. The young wizard looked at the seal. He looked at Remus. He looked at Harry, and his eyes went to the scar, and then he seemed to reach a decision that involved significantly less resistance than arguing with someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. I'll let her know you're here, he said. Can I take your names? Remus Lupin. And Harry Potter. The young man went to the door behind him, knocked, opened it slightly, murmured something. There was a pause. Then he came back. She'll see you now, he said, with the expression of someone who has just been on the receiving end of a very specific kind of authority. Amelia Bones's office looked like the office of someone who had been doing the same important, relentless job for a very long time and had stopped caring what the decor looked like some years ago. The furniture was functional and worn. The desk was enormous and covered in a controlled sprawl of parchments and folders, each pile with its own internal logic that would have been incomprehensible to anyone but its architect. Bookshelves covered 2 walls, floor to ceiling, every book apparently having been read and several of them apparently having been argued with, given the number of sticky notes bristling from the pages. There were photographs on the desk, family photographs, a few of them, tucked into the corner where they were visible to her but not to anyone sitting across from her. Harry caught a glimpse of a girl with Amelia's square jaw and dark eyes, maybe 12 years old, laughing at something out of frame. Amelia Bones herself was standing when they came in, which Harry hadn't expected. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her mid-50s, solid and squared off in a way that suggested she had never in her life made herself smaller to fit into a space. Her robes were deep navy and scrupulously neat. The monocle she was famous for was fitted over her left eye and she was looking at them through it with the expression of someone reading a document, thorough, systematic, withholding judgment until all the relevant data was in. "Mr. Lupin," she said. "Mr. Potter." Her voice was a controlled instrument. She gestured at the chairs across from her desk. "Sit." They sat. She remained standing for a moment, which was clearly a choice rather than an oversight, and then she sat too, the decisive, forward-angled sit of someone who works at their desk rather than reclining behind it. "I've heard your name in the last 6 months more than in the previous 6 years, she said to Harry directly. No preamble, no pleasantries. Mostly in the context of the Triwizard Tournament, Cedric Diggory's death, and the question of whether the Dark Lord has returned. 2 of those things are certain. One of them is being disputed by the Minister's office." She looked at him steadily. "For what it's worth, I know the answer to all 3. The question is what I can do about it from where I'm sitting." She turned to Remus. "What have you brought me?" Remus placed the scroll on her desk. "An official Marauder's Reckoning Diagnostic, authenticated under the Magical Assessment Act of 1897, conducted on Harry Potter 3 days ago. Complete with binding catalogue, signature identification, placement dates, and statutory analysis." Amelia Bones picked up the scroll. She looked at the seal for a moment, not checking it, Harry thought. Recognizing it. She knew what she was looking at before she opened it. She opened it. The office was very quiet. Outside in the corridor there was the distant sound of ministry business, footsteps, voices, a door closing. In here, nothing except the faint sound of parchment as Amelia Bones read, and the particular silence of 2 people watching someone encounter information that will change things. She read the way she sat, forward-leaning, focused, with the monocle bringing each line of text into precise relief. Harry watched her face and found it remarkably hard to read. It was the face of someone who had spent decades receiving bad news professionally and had developed the ability to process it without leaking it. But there were tells, if you looked for them. A slight deepening of the lines between her brows. Her left hand, resting on the desk, that had been open and relaxed and was now very gradually closing. She turned to the second page. The third. The annotated signature section. Here she stopped. She did not look up. She read the signature section twice. Harry saw her eyes go back to the top of it and move down again, methodically, the way you check arithmetic when the answer looks wrong but keeps coming out the same. Then she set the scroll flat on her desk and sat back in her chair and took off her monocle and looked at it for a moment. She polished it once on her robe, which Harry suspected was not about the monocle being dirty. She put it back on. She looked at Remus. 29, she said. Yes. 7 of which bear Dumbledore's signature. Yes. And you're certain of the authentication on the signature identification? This isn't, there's no question of misattribution. The Marauder's Reckoning uses the same signature identification matrix as the Wisingamoth's own forensic magic system, Remus said. The attribution is not a matter of interpretation. It's a mechanical read. Amelia looked at Harry. You were 15 months old when the first was placed. According to the report, yes. You were 11, just arrived at Hogwarts, when the next cluster was placed. Yes. And the most recent is dated to your 2nd year. She paused. You've had 14 removed. 15, Remus said. We removed 1 more last night. Which means you're walking into my office at, she glanced at the diagnostic results section of the report, which had a baseline comparative column, roughly 60% of your unbound magical capacity. Give or take. Roughly, Remus confirmed. Amelia looked at Harry with an expression that was not quite what he'd expected. He'd expected legal scrutiny. This had something else in it, something that moved through very quickly and was replaced by the professional mask before he could fully catalog it. It looked, briefly, like anger. Not at him. At something far larger than him. How is your magic feeling currently? She asked. Different, Harry said. Better. Like, it responds faster. Like there's more to it than I knew there was. Are you in any magical distress? Any instability from the removal process? No. Remus has been careful. She looked at Remus. Has he had any adverse reactions? None. The removals have all been stable. He's integrating well. Amelia nodded once, as if filing this information in the correct mental folder. She looked at the scroll again, not reading it, just looking at it, the way you look at something you're deciding what to do with. Then she reached across her desk and pressed a small buzzer on its left side. The door opened. A young Auror put her head in, sharp-faced, efficient-looking, robes slightly dusty from field work. Proudfoot, Amelia said. I need you to get me Shacklebolt, Tonks, and Savage. Here, within 20 minutes. Tell them it's a priority one. Proudfoot didn't ask questions. She nodded once and pulled the door shut. They could hear her footsteps moving fast down the corridor. Harry and Remus looked at each other. You're moving fast, Remus said. Yes. Amelia set the scroll to one side and pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward her. She uncapped a quill with the speed of someone who wrote a great deal and rapidly. Mr. Lupin, I'm going to need a full witness statement from you regarding the diagnostic procedure, the conditions under which it was performed, and your methodology for signature identification. I'll need the same from you, Mr. Potter, regarding any awareness you had or did not have of magical interference prior to the diagnostic. She was writing as she spoke, making notes on the fresh parchment in a swift, angular hand. I'm also going to need to understand the current location of the original report and confirm that no copies have been distributed to. No copies, Remus said. The original is in your hands. I made the decision not to owl it or distribute it prior to delivery specifically because of communication security concerns. She looked at him sharply. Meaning you were concerned it would be intercepted. I was concerned it might be intercepted by people who would have an interest in its not arriving here. Named people. I named them in the report. Amelia looked at the parchment again, at the signature section, and something moved behind her eyes. Yes, she said. You did. She wrote something on her own parchment, underlined it twice, and set it aside. She looked at Harry with the direct, measuring quality that seemed to be her baseline mode of human engagement. Harry found he didn't mind it. He was used to being looked at. He preferred being looked at with intelligence. I want to be straightforward with you, she said. Because you deserve that much, and because based on what I've just read you've been the recipient of considerably too little of it. She folded her hands on the desk. This report, once formally registered, which I'm doing today, sets off a legal process that cannot be quietly shelved. I want you to understand that. Registering it means an investigation, and an investigation means that the people whose signatures appear in this document will be formally notified of the inquiry against them. That includes Albus Dumbledore. I understand, Harry said. It also means that Cornelius Fudge will be made aware of this document within approximately 12 hours of my filing it, because Fudge monitors all Priority 1 filings and has done for the past 2 years. He will not be pleased. He may attempt to exert political pressure to slow or redirect the investigation. Will he succeed? Harry asked. Amelia Bones looked at him with something that was not quite a smile. It didn't get all the way there, but that lived in the neighborhood. No, she said, with a simplicity that was the most convincing kind of answer. He won't succeed. Then file it, Harry said. She reached into her desk drawer and produced a second scroll, a ministry document, official registration parchment. She began filling it in with the same swift efficiency, copying identifying details from the report. Date. Submitting party. Subject of diagnostic. Statutory basis. She paused at the field marked severity classification. She wrote, critical, urgent. She paused again at recommended action. She wrote for a full minute without stopping. When she looked up, she was looking at Harry with an expression he hadn't seen on an adult face since Sirius, in the cottage, the moment the Patronus had blazed off Harry's wandless intent and lit the room. Something that was reckoning with the size of what it was looking at. How much of the remaining 14 bindings can be removed before Lupin would want to assess the deep ones, she asked. 11, Remus said immediately. I'd want to stop at the final 3 until I've fully understood their architecture. They're older and deeper than everything else. Unknown signatures. Unknown, she repeated, latching on to this instantly. Unknown to you, or absent from the standard signature registry? Both. Remus's voice shifted slightly, the careful tone of someone sharing something they hadn't planned to share quite yet. They're unlike any magical signature I've encountered. The patterning suggests significant age, older than Dumbledore's bindings by decades, possibly by generations. They're not malicious in construction. They're contained. Very specifically structured around something foundational in Harry's magical core. I don't want to release them until I know what they're holding. Amelia was very still. You're saying they may not be suppressive. I'm saying they may be protective. Possibly. I don't know yet. But they're still legally reportable as unauthorized bindings. Yes. Whatever their nature, Harry didn't consent to them and they were placed without his knowledge. Amelia finished filling in the registration parchment. She pressed her official seal into the bottom of it, a firm, decisive motion, and set it in her out tray. This is now officially registered, she said. Time stamped as of 9:47 this morning. She looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, I want to ask you something, and I'd like an honest answer even if the honest answer is complicated. All right, Harry said. When you imagine what comes next, the investigation, the Wisengamot review, the public element of this, what do you want the outcome to look like? Harry had thought about this. He'd been thinking about it since the cottage kitchen, since the pre-dawn conversation with Sirius, since the moment Remus had said 29 and the number had settled into him and stopped being abstract. I want the bindings finished, he said. All of them. I want to know what I actually am, not what I've been allowed to be. He paused. And I want the people who did it to answer for it. Not because I'm angry, or not only because I'm angry. But because if they did it to me, they'll do it to someone else. They'll do it to whoever seems like too much, whoever they think needs managing. He held her gaze. That can't just keep happening. Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she was seeing, it was making her adjust her assessment of something. No, she said quietly. It can't. The door opened and 3 Aurors came in. Shacklebolt was first. Harry recognized him immediately, the tall, broad-shouldered Auror with the gold hoop earring who'd been part of the Muggle Prime Minister's guard detail. He'd always struck Harry as someone worth trusting without being entirely sure why. Behind him was Tonks, who had apparently come straight from whatever field operation had left her robes dusty, and who registered Harry's presence with a slight widening of the eyes that she controlled very quickly. And behind her, a compact, serious-faced wizard Harry didn't recognize who was presumably savage. Close the door, Amelia said. The 3 of you are going to read this document. You're not going to discuss it with anyone outside this room until I say otherwise. When you're done reading it, I'm going to tell you what we're doing about it. She placed the scroll in Shacklebolt's hands. He read it with the same controlled efficiency as Amelia, passing each page to Tonks as he finished, who passed it to Savage. The room was very quiet. Harry watched them the same way he'd watched Amelia, looking for the tells that good professional faces couldn't entirely hide. Shacklebolt's was the small tightening of the muscles at the sides of his jaw. Tonks's was a sharp intake of breath at the signature section that she converted, mid-breath, into something more controlled, and her eyes cut to Harry with an expression of complicated sympathy that she immediately shuddered. Savage read the whole thing without visible reaction and then looked at Amelia and said, "Who else knows about this?" "Lupin, Potter, and Sirius Black," Amelia said. "Who is not in the building?" A pause. "Dumbledore?" "Not yet. He will within hours of us starting an inquiry." "Yes. Amelia picked up her quill again. Which is why we're starting the inquiry now, before he has the opportunity to begin managing the situation. Shacklebolt, I need you to pull the signature authentication independently. Cross-reference against the Wisengamot Forensic Registry. I need a second institutional confirmation of attribution, separate from the diagnostic report itself, before this goes to formal hearing. How long? Today. Shacklebolt looked at the scroll in his hand. Something moved in his expression, complicated and private. Understood. Tonks. The Desley address. Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. I want a full ward survey conducted on the property, specifically looking for magical interference with any wards tied to Harry Potter's residential assignment. Document everything. Tonks nodded, jaw set. Savage. Cross-reference the binding placement dates with Dumbledore's known travel and meeting logs from the same periods. Specifically the second-year placement. I want to know if there's a verifiable opportunity. Savage nodded and left immediately. Amelia looked at Remus. I'll need your formal statement before you leave today. Of course. She looked at Harry. I'd like yours as well. There's an interview room on this floor, comfortable enough. It won't take long. Fine, Harry said. One more thing. She looked at both of them. For the time being, both of you tell nobody else about this. Not the Order of the Phoenix, yes, I know about the Order, I've known about it for months, and not Hogwarts staff. The investigation will surface when it surfaces, and it will be significantly more effective if it surfaces on our terms. Harry thought about Hermione, who would want to know immediately. About Ron, who would have strong opinions. About Dumbledore, who he was going to have to face eventually, and who would almost certainly find out before Amelia was ready for him to. Agreed, Harry said. Mr. Potter. She said his name with a weight that made him look at her directly. Her expression had the quality of something she'd decided to give him rather than keep professional. I want you to know that what I read in that report is, she stopped. Started again. I've been in this department for 23 years. I have seen things that should not have been allowed to happen to people. What was done to you should not have been allowed to happen to you. She paused. That's not a legal statement. That's a personal one. I don't make them often. Harry looked at her. There was something about Amelia Bones that was not comforting in the soft sense. She was not a warm person, not in the instinctive, immediate way that Mrs. Weasley was warm, or the way that Sirius was warm in his best moments. But she was the particular kind of solid that Harry had always responded to, the solidness of someone who meant what they said and had never once said it to make him feel better. Thank you, he said. She nodded briskly and stood up. Right. Let's get your statements. We have a great deal to do before Fudge finds out. The statements took 2 hours. Remus went first, in a small room off the main corridor with 2 chairs and a self-transcribing quill and an official DMLE witness certification form. Harry waited in the corridor on a hard wooden bench and watched ministry employees pass back and forth, most of them oblivious to the fact that 11 pages of documentation in an office 30 feet away were in the process of reordering everything. A witch passed carrying a stack of interdepartmental memos that kept trying to escape. A wizard in lime green healer robes was consulting with someone from magical accidents and catastrophes. An aura Harry vaguely recognized from a ministry newsletter Hermione had once left at the Burrow walked by reading a folder and nearly walked into a pillar. All of it utterly ordinary. All of it completely unaware. Harry sat on the bench and felt the 15 removed bindings humming quietly in his magic, like new strings that hadn't quite reached their full tension yet, and thought about what Amelia had said about Fudge, and what Sirius had said about Dumbledore, and about the remaining 14 bindings still in place, including the 3 deep unknown ones that Remus wasn't willing to touch yet. He thought about what Remus had said at the cottage, about the depth of his magical core. About the word ancestral. About the binding dating to when he was 18 months old, placed in infancy either by his parents or by someone acting near them. His parents had known something. Or had feared something. Or had been told something by someone who had known something and decided what to do about it. The thought sat in him, not painfully, but significantly. Another thread. Another unknown that would become known eventually, if he kept pulling. He was becoming very good at pulling. Remus came out. Harry went in. The interviewing aura was Shacklebolt, which Harry hadn't expected but found reassuring. He had the manner of someone who would ask exactly the questions he needed to ask and none of the ones he didn't, which was exactly right. The statement took an hour. Harry told it clearly and without embellishment: the visit to Privet Drive, the diagnostic, the bindings, the removal process, the decision to come to the ministry. He answered Shacklebolt's questions with the same directness, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Shacklebolt paused in his note-taking and looked at Harry across the small table. "You're not afraid," Shacklebolt said. "Not an accusation. An observation." "No," Harry said. Shacklebolt nodded slowly. "Good." He picked up his quill again. "Let's finish this." It was nearly 1 in the afternoon when they came back out through the fireplaces into the London Street, Diagon Alley end, the November in summer feeling of being outside again after hours of ministry air. Remus bought 2 pasties from a nearby Muggle bakery without asking if Harry wanted one, which he did, and they stood on the pavement and ate them and said nothing for a few minutes because sometimes the thing to do after a significant morning is eat a pasty and let everything settle. "How long before Dumbledore knows?" Harry said. "If Fudge finds out by tonight, tomorrow morning at the latest." Remus looked at the street. "He'll come to you directly. He won't use an intermediary." "I know." Harry finished the pasty. "I want the next bindings off before he does. I intended to work tonight. I can do 3 or 4, depending on which ones we tackle. Work faster than that." Remus gave him a look. "I'm not trying to be difficult," Harry said. I want to be properly myself before I have to talk to him." "That's not unreasonable." It was not unreasonable. Remus's expression acknowledged this without quite agreeing to the pace. "We'll see how tonight goes," he said, which was the Remus Lupin version of all right. They found a quiet alley and took the portkey back to Wales. The cottage was quiet and afternoon grey when they arrived. Sirius was at the kitchen table with the remains of a sandwich and a book, and he looked up when the door opened with the expression of someone who had been trying not to watch the door for the past 4 hours and had not entirely succeeded. "Well," he said. Remus set his coat over the chair. "She filed it at 9:47 this morning. It's officially registered ministry record." Sirius was very still. "And she's going ahead with it? She's not going to let it get buried?" "She had 3 Aurors reading the report 15 minutes after we walked in," Harry said. "She's already running independent signature authentication, ward surveys, and cross-referencing opportunity logs for the second-year binding." He sat down across from Sirius. "She's not burying it." Sirius sat back. Something in his face moved that was complicated and old and had very little to do with today specifically and very much to do with 12 years of things not working, of evidence ignored and truth suppressed and the people who were supposed to do the right thing consistently and deliberately not doing it. "Amelia Bones," he said, mostly to himself. "She's remarkable," Remus said. "She'll have his signature confirmed by tonight," Harry said. "Shacklebolt is doing it independently." Sirius looked at the table. He looked at his hands on the table. He looked at Harry with an expression that had lived for years behind something harder and was now, in this cottage kitchen, in the afternoon light from the Welsh hills, very close to the surface. "He'll come," Sirius said. "Dumbledore. He'll come and he'll explain it and he'll make it sound like the only reasonable choice anyone could have made and," he stopped. "I know," Harry said. "He'll be right, too, in some of it. He always is. That's the problem. I know that too." Harry looked at him steadily. "But being right about some of it doesn't make the rest of it all right." And I'm not going to pretend it does. Sirius looked at him for a long moment, and whatever it was that crossed his face, whatever complicated mixture of grief and pride in something that might have been relief, he didn't try to name it, and Harry didn't ask him to. Right then, Sirius said, and stood up. I'll make tea. Remus is going to start on the next binding. He picked up the kettle. And Harry, that Griffin Patronus. When you've got all 29 off and you're doing that wandless, I want to see it again. You'll see it again, Harry said. Outside, the Welsh hills were quiet and enormous under a sky that was finally, after 2 days, beginning to clear. In London, in an office on level 2 of the Ministry of Magic, a registration form sat in a filing system with a time stamp of 9:47 and the words critical, urgent in Amelia Bones's swift, angular hand. And in 3 different parts of the country, 3 aurors were doing their jobs with the particular focus of people who understand that some things, once uncovered, cannot be put back. The afternoon stretched out. Remus sat across from Harry and uncapped his wand, and the careful, necessary work of returning Harry Potter to himself continued. Chapter 4, The Headmaster's Argument. Dumbledore came on a Thursday. Harry knew he was coming before he arrived, not through any magical forewarning, but because Remus had spent Wednesday evening with one ear cocked toward the door and the other toward the cottage's alert charms, and by Thursday morning his posture had the particular quality of someone braced for something inevitable. Sirius had gone quieter than usual. The cottage had a held-breath quality to it that had nothing to do with the weather, which had actually improved, pale Welsh sunshine washing across the hillside, the heather drying out from the previous days of rain. They had removed 6 more bindings the night before. That brought the total to 21 removed, 8 remaining, the final 3 deep unknown ones, and 5 middle-layer ones that Remus was working through systematically. Harry was at something that Remus, running a brief assessment that morning, had described with characteristic understatement as well above the curve and then written 3 lines of notes about and refused to share. Harry felt it. He didn't need the notes. It was not an overwhelming feeling, not the way he'd expected, not like suddenly having access to some external source of enormous power. It was more like clarity. Like the difference between hearing a piece of music through a wall and hearing it in the room. Everything he'd always been able to do was still what it was, but the ceiling was gone, and the range was different, and there was a depth to it now that made him understand, for the first time, why Remus kept writing notes and not sharing them. He was in the small garden behind the cottage when Dumbledore arrived, sitting on a low stone wall with his wand loose in his hand, practicing something he'd been thinking about since the first binding came off, the deliberate, controlled expansion of magical awareness outward from his body. It was not something he'd been taught. It was something he'd been doing instinctively since childhood, he realized now, but the bindings had kept it from developing properly, like a plant that has always grown toward a light source but had the light systematically blocked. Now that the blocks were mostly gone, it was extraordinary what happened when he simply let it go. He felt Dumbledore's approach from approximately 60 meters away. Not visually, the lane was behind the cottage and not visible from the garden. But magically. The signature was enormous and ancient and extremely distinctive, like hearing a very particular instrument in an orchestra from another room. Harry had felt magical signatures before, dimly, and had always thought that was just what magic felt like when you were paying attention. He understood now that what he'd been experiencing was roughly equivalent to hearing whales' song through a telephone, technically present, compressed beyond recognition. He set down the awareness and opened his eyes. The garden wall. The heather. The pale sky. Ordinary. He went inside. He's in the lane, Harry said, coming through the back door. Sirius turned from the kettle. Remus looked up from the table where he'd been working on the formal completion notes for the removed bindings. They both looked at him. You sensed him? Remus asked. From the bottom of the lane. A beat. Remus wrote something down. Sirius poured a 4th cup of tea, automatically, and then looked at the cup and laughed once, short and genuine. Can't not be hospitable, he said. It's how we were raised. 3 seconds later, the knock came at the door. Remus opened it. Albus Dumbledore stood in the cottage doorway with the morning light behind him, and he looked. Harry noticed this immediately and filed it, tired. Not old, because Dumbledore had always been old in the way mountains are old, which is to say it was simply part of what he was rather than something happening to him. But tired. A quality of carrying something heavy over a long distance and being very practiced at not showing it. He was wearing robes of deep midnight blue with small silver moons on them that moved slowly across the fabric, and his half-moon spectacles sat on his nose, and his long silver beard was impeccably maintained, and his blue eyes behind the spectacles were as sharp as Harry had ever seen them, sharper, perhaps, than usual. He looked at Remus. "May I come in?" "Yes," Remus said, and stepped back. Dumbledore came in. He looked at Sirius with an expression of complex, genuine warmth, the warmth of a man who cared about people, which Harry had never doubted, which was one of the things that made everything else so difficult to hold simultaneously. He looked at Harry last, and that gaze was the careful one, the assessing one, reading the air between them with 70 years of practiced intelligence. "Harry," he said. "You look well." "Better than I did," Harry said. Dumbledore sat down in the chair Remus indicated. The cottage had one armchair and two straight-backed chairs, and Dumbledore took the straight-backed one without being asked to, which was either natural courtesy or very precise social navigation. Harry wasn't sure which and suspected it might be both. Sirius set the fourth cup of tea in front of him without ceremony. Dumbledore looked at it for a moment and then at Sirius. "Thank you, Sirius." "Don't read into it," Sirius said, and sat down. The four of them, with Dumbledore occupying the space he always occupied, which was slightly larger than the physical space he took up, settled around the kitchen table, and the morning sunlight came through the small window and lit the table and everything on it, including the diagnostic scroll which Remus had not thought to put away and was now sitting in plain sight between the teapot and Sirius's untouched cup. Dumbledore looked at the scroll. He did not reach for it. He looked at it the way you look at something you have already seen, in private, and are now encountering in company. "How did you find us?" Remus asked. "I have always known where Harry is," Dumbledore said simply. "The blood wards," he stopped. The word sat oddly in the room. "The protections I placed on Harry are tied to my awareness of his location. When he left Privet Drive, I knew." "And you waited 3 days," Harry said. "I did." Dumbledore looked at him. "I wanted to know what you intended before I came. I wanted to understand the situation fully." He folded his hands on the table. "I imagine you have questions." "I have answers," Harry said. "I don't need questions." Dumbledore was very still for a moment. Then he said, "The diagnostic." "Yes." "Remus ran it." "Yes." "And the report has been filed with the DMLE." It was not a question. Harry answered it anyway. "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet. He looked at the scroll again, and something moved behind his eyes, not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has made a decision and still, even now, believes it was the right one and is struggling with the fact that believing it was right does not make it feel right, standing here. "I would like to explain," Dumbledore said. "I know you would," Harry said. "Go ahead." The permission, granted so simply and so levelly, seemed to do something unexpected to Dumbledore. He had come prepared for anger, Harry suspected. For the particular defensive fury of a young person who feels betrayed, and Harry was not going to pretend that there was nothing like fury somewhere inside him, because there was. But he had had 3 days and 21 bindings of clarification, and what he had arrived at was not fury. It was something far more composed than fury, and far more difficult to argue against. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he began. "When your parents died," he said, "you were brought to me in the immediate aftermath of the attack. I held you for approximately 20 minutes before Hagrid took you to Privet Drive." He said it with the precision of someone recounting something they have reviewed many times. In those 20 minutes, I performed a preliminary assessment. What I found, he paused. You were 15 months old and you had just survived a killing curse from the most powerful dark wizard in a century. Your magical core was, he searched for the word. It was uncontained. Raw. Like, you are aware that a nuclear reactor requires containment to function safely. Without the containment, it does not simply stop being dangerous. It becomes more so. You've thought a lot about how to describe this, Harry said. A very slight pause. I have, Dumbledore said, without defensiveness. Yes. And what you're saying is that you placed bindings on a 15-month-old child because his magical core was dangerous to himself or others. The first binding, the earliest one, placed that night, yes. That was the reason. The first two, Remus said quietly. The first two bear unknown signatures. The one you placed was the third. Dumbledore looked at Remus. Something shifted in his expression, very slight, very briefly. Yes, he said. The third. So someone else had already placed two bindings before you, Harry said. Who? I believe your mother placed them, Dumbledore said. In the weeks before she died. She was aware of the particular quality of your magical potential. Lily was extraordinarily perceptive, and she had been studying ancient blood magic extensively in the last year of her life, connected to the protection she ultimately gave you. I believe she placed precautionary bindings on you herself, in the same period. The kitchen was very quiet. But you're not sure, Harry said. I'm not certain, no. The signatures are distinctive, but I cannot verify the attribution completely. Which means you placed your binding on top of two bindings you didn't fully understand, placed by someone you couldn't completely identify. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. That is accurate. All right, Harry said. Go on. Dumbledore went on. He was a good speaker, that had always been true. He built his case the way a very skilled architect builds something, each piece placed precisely, each transition logical, the overall structure coherent and even beautiful. The first binding he framed as emergency intervention. The Hogwarts ward adjustment he framed as institutional protection protocol, imperfectly calibrated. The second-year binding, the one placed during the Chamber of Secrets year, he framed as damage control, placed during an extraordinarily dangerous period to prevent Harry's expanding power from drawing additional dark attention while the school was under active threat. He explained each one. Every explanation was intelligent. Every explanation had a logic that was not insane, not evil, not the logic of someone who wished Harry harm. Harry listened to all of it. He let it finish. He let the kitchen be quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you ever consider asking?" Dumbledore looked at him. "At any point," Harry said. "Any of it. Did it ever cross your mind to ask me? Or ask my parents? Did you ask James before you placed the third binding? Did you write to them? Did you tell them what you'd done?" A pause. "You were 15 months old, I don't mean at 15 months. I mean at 11. At 12. At 13. Harry held his gaze steadily. "When you sat me in your office every year and talked to me about Hogwarts and my progress and Voldemort and my parents, did you ever think to mention that you had placed 7 separate magical bindings on me without my knowledge?" Dumbledore was quiet. "Because I would have listened," Harry said. "You know I would have. I've always listened to you. You've always been," he paused, finding the right word. "You've always been someone I trusted. And that trust was, I gave it completely. I've walked into danger because you told me it was necessary. I've accepted things I didn't understand because I believed you understood them." He paused. "Was any of that real? Did you actually trust me with any of it? Or was I just the person the plan was happening to?" The question landed like something dropped from a great height. Sirius was staring at the table. Remus had his hands very still on the surface in front of him. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once, the deep intelligence still there, still working, still assessing, but underneath it something that was not comfortable and not managed. Something that was simply sitting with what had been said. "I trusted you with a great deal," Dumbledore said finally. "You trusted me with the parts you chose," Harry said. "That's not the same thing." He wasn't angry. His voice was level and even quiet. That was the thing, the absence of fury in it made it land differently than fury would have. "You managed the information I had access to. You managed my magic. You managed the prophecy, and don't tell me I don't know about the prophecy, because I've known about it since the graveyard." Sirius let it slip, a brief flicker of something towards Sirius, who returned it without flinching. "And I understand why you didn't tell me immediately. I can follow that logic. I can follow all of it." Harry looked at him. "What I can't follow is the assumption that the following was yours to do without asking me. You're not my parent. You're not my guardian. You are the headmaster of my school and you are someone I respect enormously and who I believed, respected me in return." "I do respect you," Dumbledore said, and it was the truest thing he'd said, audibly true, the kind of truth that has no management in it. "Then you should have told me," Harry said simply. "That's what respect looks like." Silence. Dumbledore removed his spectacles. It was a gesture Harry had never seen before. Dumbledore was always so entirely composed, always fully assembled. The removal of the spectacles was small, but it was something. He cleaned them on his robe and put them back on, and when he looked at Harry again there was something in his face that had not been there when he walked in. "You're right," Dumbledore said. The words sat in the kitchen. Sirius looked up. Remus looked up. "I made decisions about your life," Dumbledore said, with a certainty I was not entitled to. "I told myself it was necessity. I told myself you were too young, too exposed, too much of a target to bear the additional risk of," he stopped. "Of being fully yourself." He was quiet for a moment. "I am not certain I was wrong about the risk. But I am certain now, having sat here and listened to you, that I was wrong to make that decision without consulting you. Without consulting James and Lily properly. Without," he paused again, longer. "Without treating you as a person rather than a variable." Harry looked at him. "That's a very good apology," he said. "You're very good at those." Dumbledore's mouth did something that was almost wry. "I've had occasion to practice." "I believe you mean it," Harry said. "I want to be clear about that. I believe you mean every word of it. And it doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change the report, and it doesn't change the investigation. But I believe you mean it." "I understand," Dumbledore said. "Do you understand why I'm not going to ask Bones to pull back the report?" "Yes," Dumbledore said, quietly. "I do." A pause. "I will cooperate fully with whatever investigation Director Bones conducts." "That would be smart," Sirius said, and his voice was controlled in the specific way that control costs something. "It would also be the right thing." Dumbledore looked at Sirius. Between them was something enormous and not entirely sayable, a history that had peaks and valleys and a long complicated geography that was not going to be resolved in a cottage kitchen on a Thursday morning. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was very much like grief, and Sirius looked back with something that had not yet decided what it was. "Sirius," Dumbledore said. "I am sorry for what happened to you. I want you to know that my failure to act on your behalf, not today," Sirius said. Not harshly. Carefully. "That's a different conversation." "Not today." Dumbledore nodded. "When you're ready." "When I'm ready," Sirius confirmed. Dumbledore stayed for another hour. The tone shifted, not to comfortable, exactly, but to something more workable. Dumbledore asked about the removal process, about how many bindings remained, about Remus's assessment of the 3 deep unknown ones, and the questions were the questions of a genuinely brilliant mind that had shifted from self-defense into something closer to collaboration. He had information that was useful, about the original placement of his 7 bindings, about the precise magical mechanics of each one, about what he had expected them to do and what they had actually done, and whether there were any he had concerns about removing. "The one placed in your second year," Dumbledore said to Harry. "I want to tell you what it was actually suppressing, because Remus's report describes the function accurately but not the reason I targeted that specific ability." Remus looked at the scroll and back at Dumbledore. "The legilimency," Dumbledore said. "Your natural, untrained legilimency. That binding was not placed to manage your power specifically. It was placed because," he paused. "Because Voldemort, in his diminished state, was beginning to establish a connection to you through your scar. A legilimentic connection. And an untrained legilimens is vulnerable, in a way a trained one is not. What I was trying to prevent was him getting access to your mind through your own untrained ability." Remus was very still. "You placed a binding on his legilimency to protect him from Voldemort's mental access." "Imperfectly," Dumbledore said. "As it turned out. The connection developed anyway, through a different mechanism, and the binding may have complicated things. Made the occlumency lessons harder than they needed to be." He looked at Harry. "I'm sorry for that." Harry thought about the occlumency lessons with Snape. About the failure of them. About the night in the Department of Mysteries, the vision, Arthur Weasley on the floor of the Ministry corridor, and all the complicated machinery of that, all the ways it had gone wrong. He thought about whether knowing this changed anything. "The binding's coming off anyway," Harry said. "With the others." "Yes. When it does, you'll want to train properly. Not with Severus." Dumbledore looked at Remus. "Remus has some ability. There are others." "I'll train myself," Harry said. "I've read a occlumency theory. I understand the mechanism. Now that I know what natural legilimency feels like," he paused, because this was something he'd only been thinking about this morning, before Dumbledore arrived, in the garden. "I think I've been doing it accidentally my whole life. Reading rooms. Reading people. I always thought that was just perception. Being observant." "It is perception," Dumbledore said. "Enhanced by a natural legilimentic sense. The binding suppressed the active, intrusive form of it, the kind that Snape uses deliberately. The passive form, the reading of atmosphere and emotional state, was never fully contained." He looked at Harry with something that was, again, more honest than managed. "You've always been able to tell when people were lying to you, haven't you?" Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. "I have." The word lying sat in the room and neither of them went near it specifically, but it was there. At noon, Dumbledore stood to leave. At the door he turned and looked at Harry with an expression that was not requesting anything, no adjustment, no softening, no appeal for a particular future. It was the expression of someone accepting a situation in full. "What you said earlier," Dumbledore said. "About being the person the plan was happening to." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been thinking about that since you said it. I will continue thinking about it." A pause. "You are considerably more than I allowed you to be. I should have understood that earlier. I should have understood it as a reason to tell you more, not less." Harry nodded. "I also want to say this," Dumbledore said. "What is coming, Voldemort, the war, the inevitable confrontation, none of that has changed. In some ways, what you are discovering about yourself makes it more complex, not less. The prophecy still exists. The connection still exists. I know," Harry said. "I know all of that is still true." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "But I'm going to face it as myself. All of myself. Not the version of me you decided was the appropriate amount." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "That is, yes. That is how it should be." Something moved in his face. "Forgive me for taking so long to understand that." "I don't know yet," Harry said honestly. Ask me again later. Dumbledore's mouth moved into something that was genuinely surprised and then genuinely, briefly, warm, the smile of a man who is hearing something real and responding to it without management. Fair enough, he said. He went through the door and down the lane, and Harry watched him go until the lane curved and took him out of sight. The kitchen was very quiet for a long moment after. Sirius was sitting with both hands wrapped around his cold cup of tea. Remus was standing at the window. Harry was in the doorway, the sunlight coming in from outside, the Welsh hillside very still in the noon quiet. That was not what I expected, Sirius said finally. Which part? Harry asked. Any of it. Mostly, Sirius looked at him. Mostly you. The way you handled that. He deserved a proper conversation, Harry said. Not just anger. You're 15. I know how old I am. I know you know. Sirius looked at him with that expression again, the one from the cottage after the Patronus, the one that didn't have a comfortable name. I'm not making a point about maturity. I'm making a point about, your father, at 15, would have thrown something. I would have thrown something. You sat there and you dismantled him with logic, and you were completely civil about it, and somehow that was, he stopped. That was more James's best moments than anything else. When he was really angry and really right about something, he'd go very quiet. Remus turned from the window. His expression was measured and precise and had been since Dumbledore walked in, and now some of that precision loosened slightly. He was honest, Remus said. About the legilimency binding. About his reasons. I know, Harry said. That's what makes it complicated. He came back in and closed the door behind him and sat at the table. He genuinely believed he was protecting me. And he wasn't entirely wrong in the specifics, some of what he did had real reasons behind it. The legilimency thing, the first binding at 15 months, I can follow the logic. He paused. It's the accumulation that's wrong. The assumption that he got to keep making those calls, again and again, without telling me, without giving me the chance to participate in decisions about my own life. He looked at the table. 7 separate times he decided. 7. And not once did he think to say, this is what I'm doing, this is why, what do you think? He doesn't think in terms of what people think, Remus said quietly. He thinks in terms of what people need. Which isn't the same thing. No. Remus sat down. It's not. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the window the hillside was sunlit and completely indifferent to everything, which Harry found quietly helpful. The investigation is going ahead, Harry said. Regardless of what he said today. Regardless of how reasonable he was. Yes, Remus said. Because this isn't only about Dumbledore. No. There are other signatures. The Hogwarts ward adjustments, someone calibrated those specifically for you, and that wasn't Dumbledore acting alone, that would have required the cooperation of the ward keepers. The 2 Petunia anchor bindings, those needed someone who knew about squib registry traces, and that knowledge isn't common. And the 3 deep unknowns, Sirius said. And those. Remus picked up his quill. I want to look at them tonight. Not remove them yet, just map them more fully. I've been thinking about what Dumbledore said about your mother. About the ancient blood magic she was studying. The protection she gave me, Harry said. The sacrifice. That's ancient blood magic. Yes. And the bindings, if she placed them, would have been placed by someone who was thinking in terms of that same framework. Protection at a very deep level. Possibly not suppression at all, in the conventional sense. Remus tapped his quill against the table. I want to understand what they're doing before I touch them. Tonight, Harry said. Tonight, Remus agreed. And Bones? Sirius asked. She'll have the independent authentication from Shacklebolt by now. She'll be moving on the formal inquiry. Remus glanced at Harry. We'll probably hear from her tomorrow. She said she'd update us once the first phase of investigation was complete. And Fudge, Sirius said. He knows by now. He knows by now, Remus confirmed. Sirius smiled suddenly, not a comfortable smile, not a reassuring one. The sharp-edged smile of a man who had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit and had been waiting a very long time for something to go correctly. How's his Thursday going, do you think? Badly, Harry said. Good, Sirius said, and stood up to make lunch with the particular energy of a man who has found, after a long time without it, something to look forward to. That afternoon, while Sirius cooked and Remus updated his notes and the cottage settled into the particular comfortable rhythm it had developed over the past 4 days, Harry went back out to the garden wall. He sat in the sun. He opened the magical awareness again, the thing he'd been practicing, the slow expansion of it outward from himself like water spreading across a flat surface. He let it go carefully, feeling the edges of it, the texture of the land around him, the cottage's structural magic, old and settled, the warding Remus had placed on the perimeter, the broad ambient magic of the hillside itself, old and slow and enormous the way natural magic always was. He held it for longer than he had this morning. Several minutes. It was not effortful in the way he'd expected, it felt, increasingly, like a natural extension of paying attention. Like peripheral vision, once you stop actively trying to see from the corner of your eye and simply let it be there. He thought about Dumbledore's face at the door. About you are considerably more than I allowed you to be. About what that meant, and what came next, and the 8 remaining bindings and the 3 deep unknown ones that his mother might have placed, which meant they might be the last thing she'd ever given him. He was not afraid of what they contained. He was curious. He was ready. He was, for the first time in his life, or the first time he was consciously aware of, entirely present in his own skin, with no part of him edited out or managed down, and the world from this vantage looked large and complicated and dangerous and completely navigable. He stayed out until Sirius called him in for food, his face warm from the afternoon sun. He went in. He ate. He was himself. The evening came in and Remus opened his notes and said, "Let me look at the deep bindings," and Harry held out his wand arm and said, "Go ahead," and somewhere in the Ministry of Magic, Amelia Bones was reading Shacklebolt's authentication report with her monocle and her angular handwriting and her particular variety of relentless competence, and somewhere in Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was sitting with the thing Harry had said to him and thinking about it, and somewhere in the minister's office, Cornelius Fudge was having a very bad Thursday. None of that was Harry's problem right now. Right now there was lamplight and the smell of tea and Remus's careful methodical magic and the last 8 pieces of a cage coming apart. Right now was enough. Chapter 5, The Storm Breaks. The owl arrived Friday morning before any of them were properly awake. It was not a ministry owl. Ministry owls were grey and officious and had a particular self-important quality to their landings that made them easy to identify. This one was a large tawny bird with the alert, no-nonsense manner of an animal that had been trained by someone who meant business, and it dropped a sealed letter on the kitchen table with the precision of a surgical instrument and then stood on the windowsill waiting for a response with the patience of something that had done this many times before. Remus opened it. He read it twice, which meant it was important, and then set it in the middle of the table where Harry and Sirius could both see it. It was from Amelia Bones. Short. Dense. Written in that swift angular hand that apparently didn't change regardless of the medium. Shacklebolt's authentication confirmed all 7 signatures independently. Ward survey of Privet Drive complete, 3 additional unauthorized binding anchors found embedded in property wards, not included in original diagnostic. Opportunity cross-reference confirms Dumbledore present at Hogwarts on all relevant dates. Formal inquiry opened under case number ML, 1995-447. First hearing scheduled Wisengamot Chambers, Monday, 10 a.m. Your attendance required, Mr. Potter. Bring Lupin. Do not bring Black. Fudge has seen the filing. He has been vocal. This is not a problem. Be here Monday. ABPS. 3 additional unauthorized binding anchors at the residential property. Someone used the blood ward infrastructure as a secondary anchoring system. The signature on those 3 is not Dumbledore's. The kitchen was very quiet. 3 more, Harry said. At Privet Drive. Which means the total was never 29, Remus said. His voice had the particular flatness of someone suppressing something significant. It was 32 at minimum. Whose signature? Sirius asked. She doesn't say. Remus looked at the letter again. But she found them. Which means they're now part of the official record too. Harry looked at the letter. He looked at the date on it, filed yesterday, sent this morning, moving with the efficiency of someone who had decided on a direction and was going at full speed. He thought about Amelia Bones in her office with the morning light coming through whatever window level 2 had, reading Shacklebolt's confirmation and immediately opening a case number and scheduling a Wisengamot hearing for Monday. 3 days away. Monday, Harry said. Monday, Remus confirmed. Then we have the weekend. Harry looked at Remus. How many bindings can you remove between now and Sunday night? All of the remaining middle layer ones. That's 5. Remus held his gaze. The 3 deep ones, the unknown signatures, I still don't want to rush those. Last night's mapping session gave me more information, but I'm not ready to act on it yet. What did you find? Remus was quiet for a moment, organizing his words with the care of someone who understands that imprecise language about precise things causes confusion. They're not suppressive in the conventional sense. I keep coming back to the word crystalline. They're structured around specific points in your magical core in a way that looks less like limitation and more like scaffolding. Or perhaps armor. He paused. There is something inside them. Something they're containing, not suppressing. Something that was placed there deliberately. My mother, Harry said. Possibly. The magical signature there's warmth in it. That's not a technical term. It's my best description. The Dumbledore bindings, even the more justifiable ones, have the quality of external intervention. These feel intimate. Like someone who knew this specific magic very personally. She was studying ancient blood magic, Harry said. She was. And ancient blood magic at its highest levels is about transfer and protection and inheritance, not merely suppression. Remus looked at the letter again. I want to speak with Dumbledore one more time before I touch those. He knows more about what Lily was doing in her last months than he told us yesterday. He'll cooperate, Harry said. Not a question. I believe he will, yes. Remus folded the letter. Can you reach him? I can reach him, Sirius said, standing up from the table with the brisk energy of someone grateful to have a task. Give me 20 minutes. They worked through the morning. Remus took off 2 more bindings before noon. The first, one of the remaining output suppressors, came free with relative ease at this point, the earlier removals having shifted the overall architecture enough that the remaining ones were less structurally embedded. Harry barely felt it as a discrete event anymore. It was more like a continuous slow returning, each removal a step in a journey rather than a dramatic moment. His magical awareness, expanding and deepening by increments, was becoming the most reliable indicator of progress, each removal extending its range slightly, sharpening its resolution, the way a camera lens being adjusted brings detail progressively into focus. The second one was harder. One of the talent-specific bindings, this one targeted at what Remus's notes described as hereditary magical intuition, a diagnostic and predictive sense that certain magical bloodlines developed, the ability to read magical situations and anticipate developments before they became obvious. It had been bound so early and so thoroughly that Harry had no memory of it and no real sense of its absence. When it came free, the effect was not subtle. He was sitting in the armchair and Remus was completing the final sequence of the removal and the binding released, and Harry said, quite sharply, Sirius is going to drop the teapot. Remus lowered his wand. 2 seconds later, in the kitchen, there was the sound of a teapot hitting the stone floor and not breaking, because it was a sturdy Welsh cottage teapot, but definitely dropping. Sirius swore with the fluent creativity of someone who had spent 12 years in Azkaban keeping his vocabulary exercised. "How did you?" Remus started. "I don't know," Harry said. He was sitting very still, not alarmed, just attentive, in a new way. "I could feel it before it happened. Like, I knew the trajectory of it. Like watching something in slow motion before the motion has started." Remus was writing very fast. Sirius came to the kitchen doorway with the expression of a man who has dropped a teapot and walked into something more significant. "What just happened?" "Hereditary magical intuition," Remus said without looking up. Sirius looked at Harry. "That's your mother," he said immediately. "Lily had that. It's why she was brilliant at charms. She didn't just perform the spell, she could feel how it was going to move before it moved. It was extraordinary." He looked slightly undone by the memory. "She used to joke that magic made more noise for her than for other people. Like the difference between a deaf person and someone with perfect pitch." Harry sat with that for a moment. The feeling was already settling, not disappearing, but integrating, becoming part of the ambient experience rather than a sharp new intrusion. He could feel it now not as a prediction so much as a kind of readiness, a quality of the world being slightly more legible than it had been an hour ago. "Perfect pitch," he said. "More or less," Sirius said. "You all right?" "Yes." Harry stood up and moved his shoulders, the way you move after sitting still for a long time. "We need to keep going." After lunch, Dumbledore came back Saturday morning. He came alone, same as before, down the lane in the sunshine, and this time Harry felt him from further away, nearly 100 meters, the signature crisp and enormous against the quieter ambient magic of the hillside. He was in the kitchen when Harry said, "He's coming," and this time Remus simply nodded and went to put the kettle on. This conversation was different from Thursday's. Dumbledore came in with less of the careful management about him, the preliminary armor of the first visit was mostly absent. He sat at the kitchen table and accepted his tea and looked at Remus with the directness of someone who had spent 2 days thinking and had arrived somewhere. "You want to know about the 3 deep bindings," Dumbledore said. "I want to know what Lily put inside them," Remus said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He set his teacup down. He looked at Harry with an expression that had nothing managed in it. "She told me," Dumbledore said, "in October of 1981. 3 weeks before she died. She had been working on a theory, a significant one, about the nature of the sacrifice protection. About what it actually did, magically, and what it required as a vessel." He paused. "She believed the love protection, the kind created by voluntary sacrifice, was not simply a shield. It was a transfer. The magic of the person who died in love and protection of another doesn't simply dissipate. It goes into the surviving person. It becomes part of their magical core." The kitchen was very still. "She believed," Dumbledore continued, "that when she died for you, her magic, her specific magical gifts, her particular quality of power, would transfer into you. Not gradually, not diluted. Completely. As an inheritance." He looked at Harry. "And she wanted to make sure that inheritance survived. That it was protected until you were old enough to know what to do with it." "The 3 deep bindings," Harry said. "She placed them herself, in the week before Halloween. She told me what she intended and I advised against it. I believed the transfer hypothesis was theoretical and that the bindings were unnecessary." He was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong. She was right. She was right and she died 3 weeks later and the transfer happened exactly as she'd predicted and the bindings she placed held what she'd given you safe for 15 years. Harry looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He thought about what Remus had said, warmth. Intimate. Like someone who knew this specific magic very personally. His mother had packed a gift for him inside his own magic and sealed it there for him to find when he was ready. He was aware that this was an extraordinary thing. He was aware that he would feel it more fully later, in private, in the quiet. Right now he needed the information. "What's in them?" he asked. His voice was steady. "Her specific gifts. Her charms, intuition, which you've already found an echo of, I think, from the hereditary intuition binding Remus removed. Her deep magical empathy, the ability to understand the emotional architecture of spells, to feel what a piece of magic means as well as what it does. And," Dumbledore paused. "Her signature talent. The thing she was most extraordinary at, that she spent the last years of her life developing to its highest possible level." "What was it?" Harry asked. "Ancient blood magic," Dumbledore said. "The ability to understand, manipulate, and transform the deepest magical inheritances. The magic that governs what we pass to our children and what our ancestors passed to us. The magic of sacrifice and love and the lines between living people." He looked at Harry. "She was, in that specific discipline, the most gifted practitioner I have ever encountered. Including myself." Sirius had not said anything for a long time. Now he said, very quietly, "She left him everything." "She left him what she could," Dumbledore said. "It was what she had." The kitchen was warm and the sun was coming through the window, and Harry sat at the table with this information and let it be what it was, not enormous and abstract but small and specific and real, the way true things are. His mother had seen what was coming and she had done the only thing she could think of to give him a fighting chance. She had given him herself. He looked at Remus. "Can you remove them?" Knowing what they contain, Remus said, "Yes. Now I know what they're structured around, I can work with that rather than against it. The release will be significant. I want to do it with care." He looked at Dumbledore. "Will you stay? Your knowledge of Lily's methodology may be useful if anything unexpected happens." Dumbledore looked at Harry, asking permission without words. "Stay," Harry said. They did it that afternoon. All three, one at a time, with Dumbledore sitting to one side and Remus working with a precision and focus that had nothing left in it but the task. Harry sat in the armchair by the window, wand in hand, Sirius in the corner, the cottage quiet around them. The first deep binding released in stages, Remus worked the outer architecture free gradually, like unwrapping something fragile, and as each layer came loose Harry felt it in a way that was unlike every previous removal. Not a ceiling lifting or a wall coming down. More like a door opening into a room that had always been there. The charm's intuition flooded in not as a new sensation but as a remembering, a deep and cellular recognition of something that was already his. The sound of magic, as Sirius had put it. The perfect pitch. He gripped the armchair arms. "Stay with it," Remus said. "I'm with it." He was. It was not overwhelming. It was like the volume being turned up on something that had always been playing, the same music, finally at its proper level. The second deep binding took 40 minutes. The magical empathy was more complex, it wasn't a sense so much as a reorientation, a shift in the fundamental way he related to the spells he'd been casting his entire life. He would need time with this one. He could already feel it changing the texture of things, like the difference between reading words and understanding language. The third took an hour. He knew, from the first moment Remus began, that this one was different from everything else. Not harder, exactly. More intentional. More carefully made. He could feel the construction of it, with his magical awareness and his mother's intuition both fully present, and what he felt was extraordinary craftsmanship. The binding was not a cage. It was a container, built with love in the literal magical sense of the word, the ancient understanding of love as a force with physical properties, with weight and direction and the capacity to do real work in the world. When it released, it did not feel like a door opening. It felt like a hand, placed briefly over his heart, and then gone. He sat with his eyes closed for a moment. Nobody spoke. When he opened his eyes, the room was bright, morning bright, though the afternoon had deepened while they worked. He understood, after a moment, that the brightness was him. Not visible light. Magical light, the kind only a magical person could perceive. It was settling, already, integrating with everything else, but for a few seconds it was simply present in the room like a statement. Dumbledore, in the corner, was looking at him with an expression Harry had never seen on his face before. Not the managed warmth, not the careful assessment. Something simpler than that. Something that looked like wonder. "Hello, Harry," Dumbledore said, quietly. Harry looked at him. He understood what Dumbledore meant. Not a greeting. A recognition. As if meeting him, actually meeting him, for the first time. "Hello," Harry said. Sunday was preparation. They went over the Wizengamot process, Remus explaining the chamber's layout and procedure, the protocols for presenting evidence, the way formal inquiry hearings were structured. Amelia would lead. Remus would present the report. Harry would be asked to give a formal account and might be questioned. The independent authentication would be entered into the record. The binding signatures, now confirmed through two separate institutional processes, would be formally attributed. Harry absorbed all of it with the new quality of attention he'd been developing all week, the sense of magic and intuition and his mother's gifts working alongside his own experience, producing not an emotional reaction but a clear, operational understanding of what he was walking into and what it required of him. "Fudge will try to disrupt it," Remus said. "He can't stop the hearing. Once Bones files a Priority 1, the Wizengamot is required to convene, but he'll attempt procedural challenges. Witnesses he wants disqualified. He may try to challenge the validity of the Marauder's reckoning as a diagnostic instrument." "Can he?" Harry asked. "He can try. It won't succeed. The 1897 Act is unambiguous and the precedent is solid. But it will slow things down." "Let him try," Harry said. Sirius was less sanguine. He had been, all weekend, oscillating between a fierce forward energy and moments of something darker, the knowledge that he couldn't be in that chamber, that he was still technically a wanted man, that Monday's hearing would happen without him. Harry noticed this without drawing attention to it, and on Sunday afternoon, when Remus was working and the cottage was quiet, he found Sirius in the garden on the wall where Harry usually sat. He sat beside him. The afternoon was warm. The hillside was properly summer-colored now, the heather coming into bloom, the light long in gold. "I'm going to be fine in there," Harry said. "I know you are," Sirius said. He wasn't looking at the hillside. He was looking at his hands. "That's not what's," he stopped. "It's not about Monday. I know Monday is going to go well. I know Bones is going to handle it and you're going to walk in there and be exactly what you are and that's going to be sufficient." He paused. I want to be there. That's all. I know." 12 years, Sirius said. Not with self-pity, with the directness of someone naming a fact. 12 years of things going wrong at the official level. Things being buried or ignored or actively suppressed. And now it's finally going right and I can't, he made a small gesture with one hand. "I'm still the man who was never given a trial. I'm still technically a convict." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Does Bones know about you? Specifically? That I'm here?" "She knows I've been involved. The letter said do not bring black, which implies, yes, she knows." "Then she's choosing not to do anything about it," Harry said. "Which means she's already made a decision about you." "Not officially. But practically." Sirius looked at him. "She's a competent person," Harry said. "She doesn't miss things. She knew you were involved from the beginning and she didn't send anyone here or make it a condition of the filing. That means something." He paused. "I'll mention it to her Monday. The lack of trial. The Azkaban question. Harry, you're part of this," Harry said simply. "The report, the cottage, all of it, you're part of why this is happening. She should know that. And she's the right person to do something about it. Sirius was very still. I'm not promising anything, Harry said. I don't know how it works legally, whether the hearing can be expanded to include, don't. Sirius's voice was rough but not broken. Don't promise me anything. Just, he stopped. Thank you. For saying it. It's true, Harry said. That's the only reason to say things. They sat on the wall together in the afternoon light, and said nothing else, and it was enough. Monday. They arrived at the ministry at 9:30, which gave them 30 minutes before the hearing. Remus was in his best robes, deep green, considerably less worn than his usual ones, clearly saved for significant occasions. Harry was in clean school robes because he didn't own anything else formal and had rejected Remus's mild suggestion that this might be a problem with the observation that what he wore to the hearing was significantly less interesting than what he was bringing to it. Amelia Bones met them at the lifts on level 2. She looked the same as she had Wednesday, squared off, uncompromising, the monocle in place. But she was dressed differently. Not her working robes but formal ministry dress, the kind you wore to Wisengamot sessions, midnight blue with the DMLE crest on the shoulder. You're ready, she said to Harry directly. Yes. Fudge has filed 3 procedural objections, she said, falling into step beside them with the efficiency of someone who walks as fast as she works. I've overruled all 3. He's appealed the overrule, which I've dismissed. He has one more avenue. He can challenge the diagnostic methodology on the floor, which he will do, and at which point I'll be calling Remus as an expert witness. She looked at Remus. You're prepared for that? Thoroughly, Remus said. He's also brought a solicitor. Ministry legal, the departmental one, which means he's using ministry resources for what is ostensibly a personal legal matter. I've flagged that separately. It'll be a nice addition to everything else. She turned a corner. There are 31 Wisengamot members attending. That's a quorum plus 5. Several of them have already read the registration document, which is public record. Their faces when they arrived this morning were informative. She paused at a door. One more thing. She turned to Harry. Dolores Umbridge attended this morning's preliminary session and attempted to have the hearing reclassified as a closed proceeding. I declined and removed her from the chamber. She is currently in her office on level 4, which is where she will remain. She looked at him steadily. If she becomes relevant to the investigation, and the signature on the 3 Privet Drive binding anchors has now been identified, and we will be discussing that today, I will deal with her through the appropriate channels. Harry went still. Umbridge. Yes. The Privet Drive bindings. Anchored in the blood wards. The ones Bones found last week. He looked at Remus. She placed them. It appears so, Amelia said. Her signature, confirmed through the same authentication process as the others. She held his gaze. She had access to the Hogwarts admissions registry and the residential ward records in her capacity as senior undersecretary to the minister. She would have had everything she needed. A pause. We'll be going into detail on that in the chamber. Harry thought about Umbridge. About the sweet voice and the pink cardigans and the quill that had cut words into his hand. About everything that had always been slightly wrong about her beneath the surface pleasantness, a wrongness he'd always sensed and never been able to fully articulate, that his mother's intuition was now making entirely legible. She didn't do it out of loyalty to Fudge, Harry said. No, Amelia said. Her motivations appear to be considerably more personal. But that conversation is for the chamber. She turned and opened the door. Ready? Yes, Harry said. The Wisengamot chamber was familiar in the way nightmares of places can be familiar. He had been here once before, the summer before second year, his wand snapped in half, his heart in his stomach, watching a room full of adults decide his fate for reasons entirely disconnected from fairness. He had survived it, but not comfortably. He walked in now and it was a different room. Not physically, the tiered benches, the stone walls, the ancient quality of the space, all the same. But he was not the same, and the difference was absolute. He was not here to defend himself. He was not here because something had been done to him and he needed an institution to believe him about it. The institution already believed him. The institution had a case number and 3 independent authentications and was about to formally lay the evidence on the record. He sat in the chair that had once held chains and found the chains absent and was briefly and precisely grateful to Amelia Bones for that specific detail. Fudge was in the upper tier with 2 other ministry officials and the ministry solicitor, a thin man with an extremely unconvincing expression of casual confidence. Fudge himself looked like a man whose Tuesday had arrived 5 days early and was every bit as bad as he'd feared. His face was going through colors that suggested he had not slept well and had not been able to eat breakfast and had spent the morning issuing directives that kept failing to produce the results he needed. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back without particular expression. Amelia Bones called the session to order. What followed was 2.5 hours of the most thorough, relentless, technically precise legal proceeding Harry had ever observed. Amelia ran it the way she apparently ran everything, with complete command of the process and zero tolerance for anything that wasn't relevant. Remus presented the diagnostic findings with the composed precision of a former academic who had been preparing this specific presentation since Friday morning, answering every procedural challenge from the ministry solicitor with citations so specific and so complete that the solicitor's unconvincing expression became simply unconvincing. The signatures were formally entered into the record. All of them. Dumbledore's 7, named and attributed. The Hogwarts ward adjustments, identified and attributed to the ward keepers working under specific instruction. Umbridge's 3, at Privet Drive, which produced an audible reaction from the Wisingamot members, not theatrics, but the particular sound of people absorbing information that shifts their understanding of something significantly. Fudge tried 4 procedural challenges. Amelia dispatched each one with the brisk efficiency of someone clearing obstacles from a path she was going to walk down regardless. When it was Harry's turn, he stood at the center of the chamber and gave his account clearly, without drama, without performance. He told them what the summer had been. He told them what the bindings had felt like from the inside, the ceiling, the wall, the constant managed diminishment of himself. He told them about the removal process and what it had returned to him, and he told them about his mother's 3 deep bindings, and what was in them, and that those had been her gift to him and he intended to honor them. He answered questions from 3 Wisingamot members, all of whom asked with the careful precision of people who had read the report and were building their understanding rather than performing scrutiny. Then he said, clearly and without preliminary, I also want to formally raise the matter of Sirius Black's imprisonment. He has never received a trial. He has never been formally charged. He was placed in Azkaban without due process and he has been a fugitive because this institution failed him 12 years ago. He is directly involved in the events of this diagnostic and this report and he deserves to have his case formally reviewed. He looked at Amelia. I'm formally requesting that the DMLE open a review of that case as part of this proceeding. The chamber was very quiet. Fudge had gone an alarming color. Amelia Bones looked at Harry for a long moment. Her expression did not change. The request is formally noted and will be reviewed under DMLE case number ML 1995-447, subfile B. She wrote something. Next. That was it. No fanfare. No argument that could be made against it in this room, in this context, with this record. Just a case number and a notation. Harry sat back down. The hearing concluded at 12:30. Amelia declared findings of prima facie evidence of illegal magical interference with a minor under sections 4, 7, and 17 of the Magical Persons Protection Act. She directed the formal inquiry to proceed to full hearing within 30 days. She issued formal notifications to all named parties requiring their attendance at that hearing. She noted the Sirius Black subfile and directed Shacklebolt to begin a formal review. Fudge attempted to make a speech. Amelia reminded him that this was a procedural hearing and that speeches were not a feature of the procedural hearing process, and then concluded the session before he had time to respond. Outside in the corridor, Remus and Harry stood in the postchamber quiet and looked at each other. "That was extraordinary," Remus said. "Bones is extraordinary," Harry said. "Yes. But I meant you." Remus looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing more and more all week, that particular combination of scholarly attention and fierce, specific pride. "The serious request. It needed saying." "It did. And you said it in the only room where it would carry legal weight." Remus was quiet for a moment. "Your father would have, Sirius told me he would have said brilliant too many times." Remus smiled. "Yes. He would have." He paused. "But he would have meant it completely." Amelia came out of the chamber behind them and they walked together to the lifts. She said nothing until the lift doors closed around them, and then she said, "That went as well as it could have gone. Better, in some respects." "The Umbridge section," Harry said. "Yes. She's going to be complicated." Amelia looked at the lift doors. "Her motivations for placing those bindings are not what you might assume. She has a documented history of strong views on the matter of what she calls magical contamination, bloodlines and power levels, and who she believes should be permitted to possess certain kinds of magic." Her jaw was set. She placed those bindings because she believed Harry Potter having full access to his magical inheritance was a threat to what she considers the appropriate order of things. Harry looked at her. "She's been in this ministry for 15 years, Amelia said. She has had access to records and systems and policy that I am now going to be reviewing very carefully." She looked at Harry. "This report has opened more than one investigation. You should be aware of that." "Good," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at him, and it was the same look as the first day, the reckoning with the scale of what was in front of her. "Good." She paused. "The serious black request. I want you to know, I've been aware of the irregularities in that case for several years. I've been waiting for the correct procedural moment to raise it without it being dismissed for political reasons." The lift doors opened on level 2. She stepped out. "You gave me the moment." Harry stepped out after her. "Then don't waste it." "I never waste things," Amelia said, which was clearly the truest statement she'd made all day. She went back into her office. The door closed. They arrived back at the cottage at 2 in the afternoon. Sirius was in the kitchen garden this time, sitting on the wall where Harry usually sat, and he stood up when the portkey deposited them on the hillside and came to the garden gate and looked at them both, and whatever he saw on their faces told him enough before either of them spoke. "Tell me," he said. Harry told him. "All of it. The procedural challenges and Amelia's responses. The signatures in the record. Umbridge, and the 3 Privet Drive anchors, and what Amelia had said her motivations were. And then, last, the Sirius Black subfile, case number ML, 1995-447-B, formally opened, review directed to Shacklebolt." Sirius stood very still throughout. He listened with his arms crossed loosely over his chest, the way he stood when he was holding himself together around something, and when Harry finished he was quiet for a long moment. "A formal review," Sirius said. "Yes." "Of the original case?" "Yes." "Shacklebolt is leading it." Harry looked at him. "It's not a pardon." "Not yet. But it's the right process. It's the first time it's been the right process." Sirius uncrossed his arms. He looked at the hillside. He looked at the sky. He looked at Harry with an expression that was too complicated to hold a single name, all the years of it moving across his face, and then he pulled Harry into a brief, fierce embrace that lasted approximately 3 seconds and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the embrace didn't already contain. He stepped back. He cleared his throat. He looked at Remus. "You," he said, "are making dinner tonight." "I was going to anyway," Remus said. "Something good. Also already planned." Sirius nodded. He looked at the cottage, then at the hillside, then back at Harry. He smiled, the real one, the rare one, the one that was his father in the photographs. "One more day on the wall," he said, tilting his head at where he'd been sitting. "Before everything changes." "It's already changed," Harry said. "I know. But not publicly yet. One more day of it being ours." He went back to the wall. Harry, after a moment, went and sat beside him. The afternoon stretched out long and golden over the Welsh hills, and the world below was moving, in a ministry chamber where a case number had been entered into the record, in a school in Scotland where a headmaster was sitting with the weight of what he had done, in offices and corridors where Amelia Bones's investigation was already pulling threads, but on the hillside, in the last of the summer light, it was briefly, perfectly still. Harry sat with it. He let it be what it was. Tomorrow the rest of the world would catch up. Tomorrow Voldemort would be moving faster, as Dumbledore had said he would be. Tomorrow the complications would compound. Tomorrow was full of things that needed facing, and Harry would face all of them, completely himself, without apology and without sealing. But today the sun was warm on the heather and the case number was in the record, and his mother's gifts were settled into him like a second heartbeat, and Sirius Black was sitting beside him on a stone wall in Wales, being something very close to happy. Today was enough. Chapter 6, What Remains. The full Wizengamot hearing was scheduled for the 14th of August. Between Monday's preliminary session and the hearing, 3 weeks passed that were nothing like the quiet of the cottage. The ministry leaked. It always leaked, because the ministry was an institution populated entirely by people who knew things and had opinions about those things and colleagues they wanted to tell, and by Wednesday of the following week the Prophet had a front-page story under the byline of a journalist named Patricia Kincaid, who Harry had never heard of but who had, apparently, spent 2 years building sources inside the DMLE and knew how to use them. The headline read, Marauder Diagnostic reveals systematic magical interference, DMLE opens formal inquiry. It was, Harry had to admit, a good piece of journalism. Kincaid didn't sensationalize. She presented the facts, the diagnostic, the binding count, the signature attributions, with the same clean precision that Amelia's own documentation had, and she quoted the Magical Assessment Act and the relevant statutes and the case number, and she let the facts do what the facts did when you laid them out clearly, which was be absolutely damning on their own terms. The wizarding world reacted the way it always reacted to significant information, loudly, immediately, and in multiple contradictory directions simultaneously. Half of it was outrage on Harry's behalf, letters to the Prophet, heated conversations in Diagon Alley, Wizengamot members making public statements about the rule of law. The other half was something more complicated, people who had spent years comfortably believing in the official version of Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the symbol, the manageable narrative, and who now found themselves looking at a 15-year-old boy who had apparently been significantly more than advertised and significantly more interfered with than anyone had told them, and didn't quite know how to hold those two things at once. Fudge issued a statement calling the diagnostic results premature and unverified, this in the face of 2 separate institutional authentications, and potentially destabilizing to public confidence, which was the closest he'd come to saying openly that truth was inconvenient, and which nobody in the press let him forget. Dumbledore issued a statement acknowledging his involvement in the binding placements, expressing his full cooperation with the inquiry, and offering what amounted to the most precisely calibrated public apology Harry had ever read. It accepted responsibility without qualification, explained context without using context as excuse, and was written in the kind of language that made it very clear he'd had a great deal of time alone with his own conscience before he put it out. Harry read it twice. He thought about what Dumbledore had said at the cottage about thinking about the person the plan was happening to, and thought that the statement, at least, seemed to mean what it said. It didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the investigation. But it was not nothing, and Harry had made a private decision some time on the hillside that he was not going to be the kind of person who refused to acknowledge when someone was doing the right thing, even belatedly. He wrote Dumbledore a 1-line response. I read it. Thank you. Dumbledore's reply came the same day. It was also 1 line. I will do better. Umbridge said nothing publicly, which Amelia described as exactly what she'd expected and not a problem. Harry had asked about this once, in a brief flu consultation with Amelia the week before the hearing, and she had said, silent defendants assume that silence limits our evidence. It doesn't. It just means she's not telling us anything we can use in her defense. She had paused and then added, she should have gotten better legal advice, in a tone that was purely professional and somehow more devastating for it. The 3 Privet Drive bindings had become, in Amelia's investigation, a thread that led considerably further than anyone had initially expected. The access Umbridge had used to place them, the Hogwarts admissions registry, the residential ward records, turned out to be access she had also used for other purposes, over other years, and Amelia's team was working through the full scope of it. Shacklebolt had described it to Remus, in a brief meeting Harry had not been present for but had been comprehensively debriefed on afterward, as a pattern of systematic interference with magical children whose power levels she deemed inappropriate. Harry had taken that information and set it in the part of his mind where things lived that he was angry about but couldn't act on yet, which was a place with a lot of occupants at the moment. The week before the hearing, Hermione arrived. She had written, several times, increasingly lengthy letters that had moved from carefully managed concern to barely contained frustration as the prophet coverage continued and Harry's responses remained sparse. He had been keeping the promise he'd made to Amelia, minimum disclosure, no detailed information to people outside the immediate circle until after the formal hearing. But Hermione had assembled the public information with the efficiency of someone who could reconstruct a complete puzzle from 3 pieces, and her last letter had simply said, I know you can't tell me everything. But I'm coming on Saturday whether you invite me or not, so you might as well invite me. Harry had shown Sirius the letter. Sirius had laughed for approximately 30 seconds and said, I like her enormously. She arrived via port key that Remus had arranged, carrying a bag that was considerably larger on the inside than the outside and containing, among other things, 4 books on magical inheritance law, 2 on ancient blood magic, a complete set of DMLE public filings for the past decade that she had apparently obtained through some combination of determination and a ministry library card, and, at the very bottom, slightly squashed, a large bar of Honeydukes chocolate. She stood in the cottage kitchen and looked at Harry with the expression of someone running a rapid assessment across multiple simultaneous axes. Then she said, You're different. Yes, Harry said. Significantly different. She was still looking at him with that focus. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It's like, you're more present than you usually are. 29 bindings, Harry said. 29 now, turns out it was 32. I know. I read the prophet coverage and then I read the case filing, which is public record, and then she stopped. Her voice, when it came again, had lost the analytical quality and found something more personal underneath it. Harry. 32. Since you were 15 months old. I know. And you're all right. Better than all right, he said honestly. Come in and I'll tell you properly. He told her properly. All of it, the diagnostic, the removal process, each binding and what it had contained, the cottage and Sirius and Remus's notes, the ministry and Amelia Bones and the hearing. His mother's 3 deep bindings, last of all, and what was in them. Hermione listened the way she always listened to important things, completely, without interrupting, with her full attention. When he finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, the ancient blood magic. Your mother's specific talent. You have access to it now. Yes. Have you tried it? Actually used it? Not deliberately. I've felt it, the way it changes how I relate to other spells. The emotional architecture thing Dumbledore described. He paused. I haven't pushed it yet. I want to understand it better before I do. Hermione reached into her bag and produced one of the ancient blood magic books, Inheritance and Craft, A Practitioner's Guide to Transferred Magical Lineage, which was a title that suggested its author had prioritized precision over readability. I brought this, she said. I got it from the Hogwarts Library restricted section. McGonagall lent me her access card. She set it on the table. I thought it might be useful. Harry picked it up. He opened it, and with his mother's charms, intuition and magical empathy both fully present, the language of the text, which was dense and technically demanding, was immediately, almost surprisingly legible. Not easy, but accessible. Like hearing a complex piece of music and understanding its structure intuitively even without having studied its theory. He looked up. Hermione was watching him. You understood something, she said. Several things, he said. Give me an hour with this. She gave him 2. The 14th of August arrived with the kind of clear, assertive morning that seemed designed to underscore the significance of what was happening. The sky over London was blue and definite. The Ministry atrium, when Harry and Remus came through the floor at 9:45, was fuller than usual. Word had gotten out, as word always did, and there were witches and wizards in the atrium who had no particular business there on a Tuesday morning but who had found reasons to be present. Harry walked through them and they parted the way crowds did for him, not exactly, but the awareness moved through the room ahead of him like a pressure system. He felt it differently now, not just the eyes but the magic, the ambient attention of a lot of people whose magical signatures he could now read with a clarity that was still slightly new and was becoming less startling by the day. He could feel the texture of it. Curiosity, mostly. Some nervousness. A handful of something warmer than that. He didn't slow down. He went to the lifts. The Wisingamot chamber on the 14th was at full attendance. All 50 members. Harry had not seen it at full attendance before, and the room at full capacity had a different quality, a weight, a density, the accumulated authority of an institution that was very old and had, at its best moments, done important things, and at its worst moments had failed spectacularly at them. He held both of those truths about it at once as he sat in the central chair. Amelia Bones opened the session at 10 o'clock precisely. What followed was the most comprehensive formal proceeding Harry had been part of, and he had been part of several by now. The full diagnostic report was entered into official record. Shacklebolt's independent authentication. The ward survey. The opportunity cross-references. Each item methodical, sequenced, building. Dumbledore gave his formal account. He stood in the chamber in his midnight blue robes and spoke with a clarity and precision that Harry recognized as the man being genuinely honest, without the usual layer of careful management. He confirmed each placement. He explained each reasoning. He was questioned by 3 Wisingamot members, searching, pointed questions, and he answered every one directly, without evasion, accepting the characterization of his actions that the law required. When a member named Griselda Marchbanks, ancient and iron-spined, asked him whether he had ever considered that the decisions he was making were not his to make, Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment and then said, not clearly enough. That is the precise nature of my failure. Marchbanks nodded once, as if a question she had been carrying for some time had received a satisfactory answer. Umbridge did not speak. She sat in the defendant's section in pink robes that seemed, in this context, aggressively wrong, and said nothing throughout, her solicitor deflecting every question with procedural objections that Amelia overruled one by one with the efficiency of someone swatting things from a surface. The evidence against her was, Amelia had told Harry beforehand, comprehensive. The signature confirmation. The access logs showing her use of the admissions registry. The ward interference documentation. And, the part Harry hadn't known until Amelia mentioned it 2 days earlier, a private correspondence, found in her DMLE security clearance file, in which she had written to a ministry colleague 5 years ago that Harry Potter's unchecked magical growth represented a destabilizing force that responsible parties had a duty to manage. The colleague had never responded. The letter had sat in a file. Amelia had found it in 20 minutes. When Amelia read the letter into the record, something moved through the chamber. Not noise. The opposite of noise. The specific silence of a room full of people deciding something. Fudge, in the observer's gallery, had the expression of someone who had been standing next to something without knowing it was dangerous and was now reassessing the past several years of his proximity to it. Harry gave his formal account third. He stood in the chamber and he told it the same way he'd told it at the preliminary hearing, clearly, without embellishment, without performance. But this was different from the preliminary in one specific way. This was the full account, the complete one, with all 29 bindings described and all 3 of his mother's deep ones included. He described what it had felt like when they came off. He described sitting in the cottage garden in Wales and feeling Dumbledore coming from 60 meters away. He described the Patronus that had blazed off his intent without a spoken word. He described his mother's gifts, and what Remus had said about warmth in the magical architecture, and what it had felt like when the last deep binding released. He did not do this to be moving. He did it because it was true and because the truth, fully laid out, was what the chamber needed to understand to do what it needed to do. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Griselda Marchbanks said, with the authority of someone who had been examining magical ability for 60 years and had no patience for understatement, "Mr. Potter, what is your current magical assessment?" "I don't have a formal one," Harry said. "I've had 3 bindings removed in the past 48 hours. The unknown signatures, resolved, finally, in Remus's 2 final sessions, confirmed as his mother's, all 3, had been the last to go. Sunday night, with Hermione sitting in the kitchen reading her inheritance law book and Sirius making tea and Remus working with the careful focus of someone handling something that mattered enormously. When the last one came free, nothing dramatic had happened. Harry had sat very still for a moment and then said, "That's all of them," and Remus had said, "Yes. That's all of them," and that had been sufficient. But informally, Marchbanks pressed. Harry considered how to answer this. He thought about his mother's books, and Remus's notes, and what Amelia had written in her own assessment after the preliminary hearing that Shacklebolt had accidentally let him see. He thought about what it felt like from the inside, which was not like power in the way power was usually described, external, forceful, a thing you wielded. It felt like completeness. Like being exactly what you were, all the way down, without apology or ceiling. "I don't think there's an established scale that applies," he said. In the observer's gallery, someone made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. Harry didn't look to see who. The verdicts were delivered at 2 in the afternoon. Albus Dumbledore, formal censure under Sections 4 and 7 of the Magical Persons Protection Act. Mandatory review of all current appointments and responsibilities. Suspension of certain ministry advisory roles pending the outcome of that review. The ward adjustments on the Hogwarts admissions system to be fully investigated and corrected. His cooperation throughout the proceeding was noted as a mitigating factor. He was not stripped of his magical ability. That remedy, Marchbanks explained, was reserved for cases where there was evidence of malicious intent, and the chamber had found that the intent, while improperly exercised, had not been malicious. Harry had watched this verdict land on Dumbledore's face. The formal censure was significant. For a man of his position and his history, public formal censure was not a small thing. His face took it with the stillness of someone accepting something they had known was coming and had decided to accept fully rather than minimize. After the session, in the corridor, Dumbledore had spoken to Harry briefly. "I will not ask you to believe this makes up for anything," he said. "I simply want you to know that I intend to use whatever time and capacity remains to me to do what I should have been doing all along. Being honest with you about what we are facing. Treating you as a partner in it." "Then do that," Harry said. "That's all I need." Dumbledore nodded. He left without the measured grandeur of his usual departures, smaller, somehow, in the best way. Reduced to something more essential. Dolores Umbridge, suspension from all ministry duties pending criminal investigation under Section 17 of the Magical Persons Protection Act. Wand registration suspended, a step below confiscation, but significant. The full investigation into her use of ministry access systems to be completed within 60 days and its findings presented to a fresh Wisengamot panel. Amelia had told Harry, privately, that she expected the 60-day investigation to expand the scope considerably. "She has been in this ministry for a long time," Amelia had said, with the expression of someone who meant more than they were formally saying. And she has had a great deal of access. I don't expect we've found everything yet. Umbridge left the chamber without looking at Harry. She walked very precisely and her back was very straight, and there was something in the quality of her silence that was worse than anything she might have said, the silence of someone who had not been broken by this, only redirected, and who was making private calculations about what came next. Harry watched her go and felt his mother's magical intuition read her like a page of text and understood, clearly, that Amelia was right to keep investigating. Sirius Black, Subfile B. Amelia presented the preliminary findings of Shacklebolt's review at the end of the session. It was brief, factual, and devastating. No trial had been conducted. No formal charges had been filed. The evidence basis for Azkaban imprisonment was, as a matter of documented record, non-existent. Shacklebolt had found the original arresting Auror's report, which contained one sentence of justification. One sentence, for 12 years. The chamber voted on the immediate question of whether a formal exoneration hearing should be convened. The vote was 41-9. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks' time. Harry sent a Patronus from the corridor outside the chamber, his griffin, blazing and enormous, going through the ministry wall and across whatever distance lay between London and Wales, carrying one word. Monday. The reply came 7 minutes later, a large silver dog that galloped down the corridor and stopped in front of Harry and opened its mouth and said, in Sirius's voice, which was rough and slightly unsteady in a way that no one who didn't know him would have recognized as happiness, "I know. Remus told me. Don't make a fuss." Harry stood in the ministry corridor and grinned, a full, unguarded grin, the kind that happened before you could decide whether to have it, and Remus, beside him, made a sound that was absolutely a laugh even though he was clearly trying to make it something else. They went back to the cottage that evening. Not because they needed to, there was no particular reason to stay in Wales anymore. The work was done. The hearing was complete. The cottage had been temporary from the beginning, a place to work in and think in, and its purpose was served. But none of them had arranged anything else yet, and the cottage was familiar and good, and the evening was warm, and Hermione was there with her inheritance law books, and Sirius had already apparently started cooking because the smell of something with garlic in it was coming through the kitchen window when they arrived. They ate outside because the evening was the kind that demanded it, all 4 of them, plus Hermione, at the small garden table that wasn't quite large enough for 5 people but managed it anyway, with the hillside spread out below them catching the last of the light and the heather properly in bloom now, purple gold in the evening sun. Sirius had made pasta with a sauce that had no right to be as good as it was, which Harry said and Sirius received with the equanimity of a man who knows he is right. They talked, not about the hearing, not about cases and verdicts and what came next, but the conversation that comes after significant things are done, when people who have been moving fast find themselves briefly still and discover they have things to say to each other that aren't about the crisis. Hermione asked Remus about the Marauder's reckoning and how he and James and Sirius and Pettigrew had developed it in 7th year, and Remus told the story of its origin, the prank contract, the panicked late-night spell work, the accidental discovery that they'd created something genuinely sophisticated, and Sirius added details and contradictions and Remus corrected the contradictions, and the story got funnier and more complicated until Harry was laughing at something that had happened before he was born and felt completely present in it. The evening deepened. Hermione collected the plates with the efficiency of someone who grew up with parents who had a policy about clearing the table. The sky went the deep saturated blue that comes between sunset and full dark, and the first stars appeared, and nobody moved to go inside. Harry looked at the hillside. He looked at the sky. He looked at his hands on the table, the same hands, the same scar, the same everything, but not the same. He thought about what Amelia had asked him in her office on the first day, "What do you want the outcome to look like?" He had answered with what he'd wanted the investigation to achieve. But sitting here now, with the evening on the hillside and Sirius telling a story about a 4th-year prank that had gone wrong in 3 simultaneous directions and Hermione laughing despite herself and Remus shaking his head in the way that meant he was also laughing but maintaining professional distance from the fact, Harry thought that the question had another answer. A simpler one. He wanted this. Not metaphorically. This specific thing, people he trusted, telling stories, in the open air, with dinner finished and the stars coming out and nobody managing him or containing him or deciding on his behalf what was the appropriate amount of himself to bring to the table. He had this. He was fully present to have it. Later, when Hermione had gone to bed and Sirius had gone inside to do something he described as not watching the door for owls, definitely, Harry and Remus sat on the garden wall in the full dark and were quiet in the comfortable way they'd gotten very good at over the past weeks. The blood magic, Remus said, after a while. Your mother's discipline. Have you thought about what you'll do with it? Some, Harry said. Hermione's book was useful. There's a passage about inheritance practice, using transferred maternal magic deliberately, learning the mechanics of it. He paused. It's not something that can be rushed. It needs to be worked with properly. No, Remus agreed. It's not for rushing. I want to understand it fully before Voldemort moves. Harry looked at the sky. Dumbledore said the connection still exists. The Horcrux question. He said it plainly, because it was plain, the most complicated and dangerous piece of what was coming, the thing that had been hovering at the edge of every conversation since the graveyard. I've been thinking about it. About whether the blood magic changes the options. Remus was quiet for a moment. Does it? I don't know yet. But, Harry paused, finding the right words. The protection Mum placed on me when she died. The transfer. What Dumbledore called voluntary sacrifice magic. The thing that rebounded the killing curse. He looked at his hands. Ancient blood magic is the study of exactly that mechanism. The love protection. The sacrifice transfer. If I understand it fully, if I understand it the way she understood it, then you might understand the Horcrux question differently, Remus said. Yes. That's not a comfortable thought. No, Harry said. But it's an honest one. He paused. I'm not afraid of it. I know, Remus said quietly. That's one of the things I've been noticing all week. Is it bad? No. Remus was very direct about this. It's not recklessness. You're not charging at it without thinking. You're approaching it clearly, with all of yourself, and he stopped. That's the best possible way to approach it. It's the way your mother would have approached it. Harry sat with that. The 3 unknown bindings, he said. Her 3. The last ones. When they came off, I tried to tell Sirius about it and I didn't have the right words. Try me, Remus said. Harry thought about it. It felt like someone handing me something that they'd kept safe for a very long time and were finally able to give over. Not a loss, not like she was gone because the bindings were gone. More like, she'd been holding it for 15 years and now she could put it down. He paused. I know it's not literally what happened. How do you know it's not? Remus said. Harry looked at him. I don't mean literally, Remus said. I mean, in the sense that magic at that level, the ancient blood magic she was working with, it doesn't operate the way ordinary spells operate. It has its own logic. And in that logic, he paused. I don't think the idea that she was present in those bindings in some form, and that releasing them was an act of completion for her as much as for you, is as metaphorical as you might think. Harry held this. He didn't push it. He let it sit in him the way true things sit, not confirmed, not refuted, just present. She knew, Harry said. When she placed them. She knew what she was going to do. She knew she was going to die for me. Yes. And she still placed them carefully. She still thought about the long game. About what I'd need 15 years later. That's who she was, Remus said. She thought ahead. She thought in terms of what you'd need, not what was easiest. He paused. She would have liked you. Not just loved you, liked you. The way you are now. She would have found you extremely interesting. Harry laughed, a short, real one. Is that a compliment? From Lily Evans, being found interesting was the highest one. Remus smiled. She didn't find everyone interesting. She had very high standards. They sat on the wall for a while longer. The night was warm and the stars were very sharp over the hillside, and somewhere inside the cottage Sirius was demonstrably watching the door for owls because the light in the kitchen hadn't moved in 20 minutes. What comes next? Harry said. Not a question. The exoneration hearing for Sirius. The continued investigation into Umbridge. The full formal inquiry into the Hogwarts ward adjustments. Dumbledore's review. Remus paused. Voldemort moving faster. The Order reforming properly, now that the concealment justification has been somewhat dismantled. And you. Me. You, learning your mother's discipline. Finishing your education. Growing into what you are. He paused. The world knowing what you are, now. That's different. The Prophet coverage has changed the public understanding of who Harry Potter is, and you can't put that back. I don't want to put it back, Harry said. I know. Remus looked at him. How does it feel? The public part. Harry considered this honestly. Strange, he said. Not bad strange. Just, I've spent so long being known for the wrong things. The scar, the survivor, the symbol. People having a version of me in their heads that was never really me. He paused. Now they know something real. I don't know yet what they'll do with it, but at least it's real. Yes, Remus said. At least it's real. A light went on upstairs in the cottage, Hermione, probably, reading one of her books. The kitchen light, after a moment, went off, which meant Sirius had finally stopped watching the door and gone to bed, or was watching the door from a different room. Harry jumped down from the wall. I'm going to write to Ron tomorrow, he said. He's been left out of this long enough and he's going to be furious about it. He is, Remus agreed. The Weasleys generally are going to have opinions. Mrs. Weasley is going to want to mother me within an inch of my life and I'm going to let her, Harry said. I've decided. Remus looked at him with the expression, the notes and fierce pride expression, the one Harry had gotten used to over the past weeks and had stopped pretending not to notice. That's a very healthy decision. I know, Harry said. I'm full of them lately. He went inside. The cottage was warm and dark and quiet, and he went to his room and lay down on the narrow bed and looked at the low stone ceiling and thought, not in the spinning, weighted way of the Privet Drive nights, with the crack in the plaster and the locked door and the compression of everything that had been taken from him, but in the straightforward, quiet way of someone who has things to think about because the future is full and interesting and belongs to them. He thought about his mother, sitting in a house that was about to be attacked, placing gifts inside her son's magic with the care of someone building something meant to last. He thought about Sirius waiting in Wales for a hearing that would finally, 15 years late, tell the truth about him. He thought about Amelia Bones in her office with her angular handwriting and her monocle and her complete unwillingness to be moved by anyone's convenience. He thought about Remus, who had looked at a diagnostic result that destroyed him and had not set it aside or softened it or waited for a better moment, but had simply done what needed doing and kept doing it. He thought about the question Amelia had asked him, what do you want the outcome to look like? He had his answer now, the full one. He wanted the world to be the kind of place where what had been done to him couldn't keep being done. Where the people with power over children's lives were accountable to something larger than their own certainty. Where truth filed at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning couldn't be buried by anyone's convenience or politics or deeply held belief in their own necessity. He wanted to be fully himself in that world, without apology, without a ceiling. He was and he was going to remain so, regardless of what came next, regardless of what Voldemort was planning or what the Wisengamots still had to work through or what complicated conversations with Dumbledore still lay ahead. All of that was real and all of it was coming and he would meet it the same way, clearly, completely, as himself. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything. He closed his eyes, and in the dark behind them his mother's magic hummed quietly in his chest like a second heartbeat, patient and certain, exactly as she'd intended it to be. Outside, the Welsh hillside was dark and enormous and completely indifferent. Inside, Harry Potter slept. 3 weeks later, in a Wisingamot chamber at full attendance, Sirius Black was formally and completely exonerated. He sat in the chair in the middle of the chamber and looked like a man who had been prepared for the hearing to go wrong, who had been preparing for things to go wrong for so long that the habit was structural, and when Griselda Marchbanks read the final verdict and the chamber voted 39-11 and Amelia Bones said, in her flat, carrying voice, "Sirius Orion Black is hereby exonerated of all charges and restored to full legal standing," Sirius sat very still for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry, who was in the gallery, and grinned. It was the grin from the photographs, the young one, the one from before everything. Harry had seen it occasionally in fragments over the past year, breaking through the surface of the man Azkaban had made. He had not seen it like this, full and unguarded and completely present in the world. Harry grinned back. Remus, beside Harry in the gallery, was doing the thing where he was very clearly not crying by the application of extraordinary professional self-control, which was not working at all. Hermione, on Harry's other side, was not pretending. She was crying openly and had been for approximately 4 minutes, which Harry found completely appropriate. That evening, the 4 of them, Harry and Sirius and Remus and Hermione, sat in the cottage kitchen for the last time. They would leave tomorrow. Sirius had a house now, legally his again, and things to do, and a life to rebuild that was going to be complicated and then gradually less complicated. Remus had his own things. Hermione had to get back to the Grangers, who had been patient and slightly bewildered all summer. Harry had letters to write and people to see and a new term to prepare for and a world that was now looking at him with its actual eyes. But tonight they ate in the kitchen and talked and the cottage was warm and familiar around them, and it was Sirius who found the bottle of fire whiskey in the back of a cabinet and poured glasses for the adults and a very small one for Harry and Hermione. "You've both earned it, don't argue," and raised his glass. He looked at all of them. He looked at Harry last, with everything the past 3 weeks had been and everything that was going to come next held in the specific way that Sirius Black held important things, which was directly and without pretense. To Remus, Sirius said. "Who paid attention?" "They drank." To Amelia Bones, Harry said. "Who didn't waste it?" "They drank." To Lily, Remus said, and his voice was very steady, and he looked at Harry when he said it, and Harry looked back. "They drank." Sirius set his glass down. He looked around the kitchen, the old stone and the low ceiling and the small window and the worn table where so much had happened in 3 weeks. He looked at Harry. "Your father," Sirius said, "would have been," he stopped. He tried again. "He would have, I know," Harry said. "He would have been so, I know, Sirius." Sirius stopped trying to finish the sentence and simply nodded once, which was sufficient. The fire was warm. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the hillside was dark and enormous and the stars were very clear, and somewhere in London a case number was in a filing system that couldn't be erased, and in 3 Wisingamot records there were verdicts that couldn't be undone, and in Harry Potter's magical core, his mother's gifts hummed like a foundation, not separate from him, not added on, but simply what he was, all the way down, at last. He stayed at the table with the people he trusted. He let the evening be what it was. The world was different. He was different. For the first time in his life, that was not a problem to be managed or a risk to be contained. It was simply, completely, exactly right.